Chapter 904. Just after Zhang Yan left, on an island, a green toad jumped out from the crevice of a rock. Its eyes coldly looked at the sky, then it leaped into the water, and after a while, it swam to the front of the underwater palace. It opened its big mouth, and spat out a ray of golden light, hitting the stone door. With a rumbling sound, the door opened with a loud bang. It leaped forward and quickly scuttled into the cave. With another loud noise, the cave door closed once more. After entering the room, it thought, if the junior can't find me here, he will look for me elsewhere. He won't come back here for the time being. It's safe now. All along, it had never hidden in any secret place of the cave residence. Instead, it attached its spirit to a green toad and used that to avoid the insect soldier's search. However, this was not a long-term plan after all. However, it was difficult to find a body to store his spirit. Even this green toad was carefully selected. Moreover, it needed his blood to maintain at all times. If there was an accident, he would not be able to change to another body. By then, his spirit would have no place to rely on. However, what made it difficult for him was that once he used his blood to refine the body, there would be demonic aura leaking out. He was afraid that he would be noticed immediately. Hence, he had to find a safe place. He came across this cave residence by accident when he was looking for treasures after he escaped. Previously, he did not pay much attention to it. However, now, it was a good place to go. However, even if he hid in there, he would eventually be found out. As a last resort, he took the risk and played a small trick. First, he tried to attract the attention of Zhang Yan and asked them to investigate. After they left, he moved in because he had already explored this place. He expected that they would not come back again. Hence, he could spend a period of time in peace. He laid on the ground and slowly separated a strand of blood. He began to carefully refine the body. If the spiritual vigor was strong, as long as there was enough time, it could evolve into the heavenly demon's body again. However, now, he could only adjust it slightly so that the blood would not be consumed too much. About 10 days later, he seemed to have sensed some danger. He was shocked. He looked up and stared outside. He saw 2 dragon figures circling outside the underwater residence. How could he not know that his plan had been seen through by the other party? His heart skipped a beat. If they waited for the main character to arrive, then there would be no chance of survival. In a moment of desperation, it opened the stone door and rushed out. It understood in its heart that if it didn't risk its life now, it would definitely not be able to rush out. As soon as it reached the outside world, it desperately urged its blood essence, and its figure instantly grew explosively. In the blink of an eye, it was over 100 feet tall. Its abdomen swelled up and emitted a strange gurgling sound. After that, it opened its mouth and inhaled, and the surrounding waters of a few dozen li were immediately stirred up by a boundless whirlpool. The 2 flood dragons were pulled along by the flow of water, and they were shocked. They were spirits of the water, and controlling water and clouds was an innate ability. However, at this moment, it was as if they had fallen into mud, and it was extremely difficult for them to move. They didn't expect this demon to have such abilities even at this stage. They struggled to break free, but this divine ability seemed to have the same effect as the heaven and earth seal. For a moment, they couldn't do anything and could only be dragged in step by step. The demon's eyes revealed a sinister look, and it thought in its heart, I'll swallow these 2 little flood dragons first to replenish some of my vitality, then I can escape. Just as it was about to succeed, a thin strand of golden light suddenly fell from the top of its head. Its whole body quivered, and it felt that it was not a good thing. It didn't dare to resist, and hurriedly leaped to the side. However, at this moment, a shell leaf suddenly flew over, as if it had been waiting there for a long time. A ray of light fell on its head, and immediately enveloped it. Then the light spun in the air, and became smaller and smaller. Finally, it became the size of an inch, broke through the water, and flew into the sky. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand in the air, and caught it in his palm. He sensed for a while, and saw that the spirit was hiding in a drop of blood essence, and it seemed that it still didn't want to admit defeat. He smiled faintly, took out a talisman, stuck it on it, and threw it into his sleeve. Then he went to the tower in the sky. When he sat down in the tower, he took out a rui and waved it lightly. Smoke rose in front of him, and a three-legged copper cauldron appeared out of nowhere. He pinched it with 2 fingers, and took out the spirit of the demon shovel, and threw it into the cauldron. Now that the demon had reached the stage, it couldn't cause any more waves, and there was no need for him to do it himself. With this cauldron, it wouldn't take long for it to be refined. An hour later, Zhang Yan examined the cauldron, and there was no trace of the demon left in the cauldron. He knew that the demon had been completely eradicated, and he couldn't help but think, the demons of the 3 continents have been wiped out, and I can calm down and participate in the 3-continent erosion runes. After thinking for a while, he summoned the 2 flood dragons and Zhang Chan into the tower, and said, I need to go into seclusion to comprehend Tao, and I don't know when I will succeed. There are many pills in the cauldron, and you can take them and cultivate on your own. Don't wait for me to summon you, and don't come over. Zhang Chan said, Master, I'm willing to serve by your side. The 2 flood dragons also expressed their loyalty. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and said, When I need you, I will summon you. Go. The 3 of them didn't dare to say another word, and they retreated. After the 3 of them left, Zhang Yan sat quietly in the tower for 3 days, and then he tried to search for the erosion runes hidden in the 3 continents. This time, he didn't have to worry about anything, and he didn't have anything to worry about, so he opened up his mind and didn't stick to a corner of a continent. Instead, he tried to sense the spiritual vigor in the mountains and rivers. In the sky above the 3 western continents, pagodas floated in the sky, from north to south, from east to west, accompanied by the moon and the sun. They floated for more than 10 years. The mortals of the 3 continents didn't know about the stars, and they only thought that there was a god-master sky lantern in the sky, and they constantly worshipped it. Zhang Yan was immersed in it, and he didn't know how much time had passed. One day, his body trembled slightly, and he retreated from his meditation. However, there was still a hint of contemplation in his eyes. What was recorded in the inscription was a battle of principles between 2 cultivators who had different Tao paths. As for the identity of both parties, it was impossible to find out. However, the general course of events was that one of them believed that the path of the heavens and man were different. To use a human to peer into the heavenly Tao, one must abandon oneself and follow the heavens. Only by not giving birth to oneself could one live forever. If one didn't do this, one wouldn't be able to attain the Tao. On the other hand, the other side believed that humans were creatures born from the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Everything they did was within the natural order of things. The will of the heavens was our will, and our will was the will of the heavens. If one was firm in one's Tao, then a small movement would form the universe. Neither of them could convince the other, so they used the scenery of the 3 western continents to set up the eroded inscriptions in an attempt to attract the support of their fellow Taoists. Zhang Yan had no way of knowing the outcome of this battle. This time, he only managed to understand 10 to 20% of it. Due to the limitations of his own cultivation, he was unable to understand many of the profound and abstruse descriptions. Moreover, there was something strange about it. Many places were hidden. He spoke vaguely, but it didn't seem like he was trying to hide something. Instead, it seemed like he was avoiding something. What was worth mentioning was that the 2 of them were carving on one side of the world. Because of the wonderful evolution. They actually predicted the future calamity of the 3 western continents at the same time. However, both of them believed that the world gave birth to all things. It could be destroyed or created, it could be destroyed or created, and they didn't take it to heart. They only mentioned it at the end. Zhang Yan thought about it carefully and felt that the 2 of them were arguing about whether the heaven controlled oneself or the heaven controlled oneself, whether the heaven Tao was the human Tao, or the human Tao was the heaven Tao. From his point of view, the former path of abandoning oneself was definitely not one to pursue. If one had to choose, it would definitely be the latter path. As he thought about it, suddenly, an indescribable mysterious feeling rose in his heart. His expression changed slightly, and he sensed again. He realized that the vein of the eroded inscriptions that advocated abandoning oneself and following the heaven had disappeared. He couldn't see a trace of it anymore, as if it had never appeared. He thought about it and suddenly understood. It turned out that there was no such thing as right or wrong, victory or defeat. The Tao that the Taoist cultivators agreed with was the Tao that won. At this point, he couldn't help but fall into deep thought. No matter what, this is still the Tao of others. What is my Tao? Yuxiao School, Moving Star Palace. A cultivator in his 30s in a robe with a feather fan in his hand walked into the alchemy room. He bowed to Wu Fenggu and said, "Greetings, senior martial brother." Wu Fenggu raised his hand and invited him to sit down. He said, "Junior martial brother, is there a message from the clan elder?" The middle-aged cultivator gently waved his feather fan. "Even if I don't say it, senior martial brother can guess it." Wu Fenggu said indifferently, "Junior martial brother, if you have something to say, just say it." The middle-aged cultivator looked at him with bright eyes. "The clan elder sent me to ask. A few days ago, senior martial brother summoned senior martial brother. What did he say? Why didn't he report it afterwards?" Wu Fenggu's face was expressionless. He said, "Nothing much. He just wanted to give me some pointers. Also, in a few months, senior martial brother Zhou will finish his closed-door training." The eldest disciple of Yuxiao, Zhou Yong, was superior to Wu Fenggu in both the reputation of the sect and the evaluation of the world. However, ever since he went into closed-door training, he hadn't come out for more than 200 years. Thus, all the matters in the sect, big or small, were handled by Zhou Yong. When the middle-aged cultivator heard this, his hands stopped moving. He frowned and said, "This is a big matter. Why doesn't senior martial brother fight for it?" "Are you really willing to?" Wu Fenggu interrupted him. "This may not be a bad thing. In the sect, those who are capable will rise. The three great tribulations will only become more and more intense in the next 1,000 years. If senior martial brother Zhou has the ability, you will naturally lead the group. I have no complaints." The middle-aged cultivator glanced at Wu Fenggu with a strange expression. He then shook his head and sighed. He said with a hint of mockery, "I heard that Shaoqing, Qingchenzi, and Qinsong's Qiyuntian have already reached this stage. If they can survive the tribulations, the three of them will control the overall situation. As for the others, they will probably be like the stars accompanying the moon, losing their luster." However, Wu Fenggu didn't seem to understand the meaning behind his words. He said calmly, "Perhaps there's one more person." The middle-aged cultivator nodded. "Of course. That Yuan Hongyang can't be underestimated either." Wu Fenggu shook his head. "I'm only talking about the disciples of the celestial sect." The middle-aged cultivator's eyes lit up. He leaned forward and said, "Who do you think it is, senior martial brother?" Wu Fenggu looked at him and said slowly, "Qinsong's Zhang Yan." The middle-aged cultivator was startled. After a while, he nodded and said, "In terms of talent, there are indeed very few people in our generation who can surpass Zhang Yan. However, senior martial brother, don't forget that he has only cultivated for 300 years. Moreover, it will be 400 to 500 years later. Why do we need to mention it now?" Wu Fenggu said indifferently, "Let's just wait and see." He stood up and said in a meaningful tone, "Junior apprentice brother, don't forget that Zhang Yan has a grudge against the Zhou clan." With that, he turned around and walked into the inner hall, leaving the middle-aged cultivator standing there in a daze. Chapter 905. After Zhang Yan read the inscriptions left behind by the two sages, although he did not find the method to achieve the ultimate Tao, he had found a trace of a clue. He understood that the so-called emotionless and emotionless was a generalization. Just like how the heavens were divided into yin and yang, all things could not escape from it. And the path that he was searching for in more detail was within the Tao of emotion. When he was observing it that day, he had vaguely grasped a hint of mystery. Unfortunately, it was only for a moment. After he settled his mind, it was hard to find again. Because of this, he realized that perhaps when he recognized the Tao of emotion, his future path was already different. The Tao of emotionless was that the heavens and earth were not benevolent. There was no joy or sorrow, no thoughts or thoughts. In cultivation, one did not know where they came from, did not know the past. As long as one rejected the paths that did not belong to oneself, one would naturally reach the true path. As for the Tao of emotion, it was to observe the wonders of the changes in the heavens and observe the workings of the universe. All things existed in one's heart. Finally, one would be enlightened and see the true essence. From then on, one would be able to reach the spirit path. He knew that this step was like the difference between heaven and earth. It was difficult to achieve in a hurry. After thinking for a moment, he decided to first go to the Donglai continent. As for this matter, he could slowly think about it on the way. There were two ways to go to the Donglai continent. One was to go to the land of sunset and cross the endless ocean. The other was to go from west to east and retrace his steps. If he went back, it would be inexcusable to pass through the mountain gate and not enter. Right now, the East Flower continent was in the midst of the three great tribulations. The mystic and demonic paths were at war. Since he had already left his position and had not completed his cultivation, it was not the best time to go back. After some consideration, he decided to go west. Beyond the three western continents was a place called the Muddy Ocean. Needless to say, the wind was high, the waves were strong, and the lightning was fierce. It was said that there were demonic fish monsters that had survived from ancient times until now. Their bodies were thousands of feet long. Whether it was ancient or modern, the records all referred to it as a wild world. However, these monsters were powerful in terms of spiritual power, but their intelligence was inferior to that of ordinary demons. The ancient sky demons that Zhang Yan had fought before could not be compared. Therefore, he did not take it to heart. Moreover, after passing the west continent, there would be no more golden moon bugs in the sky, so he could travel above the high cloud and rest when he was tired. A few days later, it seemed like it had been chopped down just now. Its branches were complete, and its leaves were luxuriant. What was most peculiar was that there were pavilions, terraces, and pavilions on the branches, as well as bridges with springs and springs. There was even a peach blossom forest, and the little pink makeup was hidden among the tender branches and warm leaves. The green and red complemented each other, causing one to forget their worries. Zhang Yan's eyesight was extremely good, and he could see that there actually wasn't any restrictive formation here, and this huge piece of wood itself was a strange object. It was wrapped in spiritual light and shrouded in mist, and when the wind and waves on the ocean collided with the layer of mist, the violence was dispersed and calmed down. He couldn't help but praise and said, "This is a paradise." He didn't hide his whereabouts when he came here, and at this moment, standing outside, he was naturally noticed by a young man and woman who were patrolling outside the huge piece of wood. Their gazes frequently sized up the two flood dragons, and it seemed like they were surprised that someone could control such fierce creatures. The two of them pointed at each other a few times, and the woman seemed to be eager to give it a try. She wanted to come up and greet them, but she was held back tightly by the man. After looking at them cautiously, he escaped into the huge piece of wood. Not long after, a Taoist walked out from inside. He had straight eyebrows and a straight nose, and his sideburns looked like they were cut by a knife. He wore a plain Taoist robe, and he looked refreshed and clean. He came in front of Zhang Yan, and his expression revealed some surprise. He took the initiative to come up and bow and said, "An outsider has arrived, and I'm sorry for not welcoming you. May I know the reason for your visit?" Zhang Yan looked at this Taoist, and he was only in the first layer of the Yuanying realm, and his aura was a little off. He should have used some unorthodox method to enter this realm, but he didn't look down on him at all. For the other party to be able to survive in this muddy ocean, he was definitely not a simple person. He smiled and said, "I'm Zhang Yan. I'm traveling out at sea today, and I happened to pass by this place. I saw that there was actually a fellow Taoist in this desolate sea, so I came to visit. I hope I didn't disturb the owner of this place." When the Taoist heard that he was just passing by, he immediately relaxed and said repeatedly, "I didn't disturb you, I didn't disturb you. Other than a few people from the same sect, I haven't had any guests for more than 100 years. Now that I see a fellow Taoist, I feel especially close." Zhang Yan smiled and raised his hand, saying, "So you are the owner of this place, please forgive me for being impolite." The Taoist hurriedly returned the greeting, saying, "I don't dare." I'm Jin Huadu. I'm the palace master of this place. If you don't mind, please come and have a seat at my humble place. Zhang Yan said a few polite words, and then followed him to a tall pavilion in the giant tree. Perhaps it was because he hadn't seen anyone from the outside for a long time. After they sat down, after tea was served, Taoist Jin couldn't wait to ask about the situation on land. Seeing that the things he asked were all unimportant, Zhang Yan didn't hide anything, and so he roughly told him about the current situation in the East and West continents. When Taoist Jin heard that the East continent was currently facing a great calamity, he sighed repeatedly. He said, "Fortunately, my ancestor had the foresight to not go east, but to establish a sect on the sea, avoiding the disputes of the earth calamity. Otherwise, we would have been dragged into it." Zhang Yan asked curiously, "From what sect?" Master Jin said, "Is your sect also a sect from the West continent in the ancient times?" Speaking of the origins of the palace master, Taoist Jin's face showed some pride. He said, "Back then, my palace master palace was also a large sect in the West continent. Fellow Taoist has come from the Western continent, so I presume you have also seen the broken spirits of that place. After the calamity, the ancestor of my Jin clan did not follow everyone to the Eastern continent. Instead, he brought the disciples of the clan to this sea and established another clan here. Since then, it has been more than 10,000 years since then." Zhang Yan also nodded, saying, "To be able to establish a sect in the middle of the sea and pass down its legacy for 10,000 years, your ancestor must have been a person of great courage and wisdom." When Taoist Jin heard this, he seemed to have thought of something, and a look of shame appeared on his face. He sighed, "It's a pity that the later generations are not up to expectations, wasting the ancestors' painstaking efforts." Zhang Yan was surprised. "How so?" Taoist Jin sighed and said, "Although my ancestor had the cultivation of a grotto heaven, he was a modest person. He thought that instead of going to the East continent to fight with others, it would be better to establish a sect on the sea. However, no one in the same sect was willing to agree, thinking that the sea was not a good place to go." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. In all fairness, this was not nonsense. Cultivators were particular about dharma companions, wealth, and location. It was inconvenient to travel with other sects on the sea, and the spiritual opportunity was not obvious. If there was no one with profound cultivation to oversee it, as time went by, it would naturally not be valued by others, and in the end, it could only become a secluded sect. It seemed that Chongyue True Temple had purposely provoked a fight with Donghua Mystic Sect, so as to train their disciples and preserve the sect's reputation. Another example was Tao Jinren. He promised him 3 promises to repay the favor, but at the same time, it also made Clear Feather Sect and Zhaoyu Sect connected. Taoist Jin continued, "After this incident, my ancestor made up his mind to create another continent outside of the 9 continents." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "With your ancestor's ability, it would not be difficult to move mountains and mountains, but I wonder how to gather spiritual opportunity?" All the spiritual opportunity in the 9 continents came from the roots of the earth. It was not that there was no spiritual opportunity on the sea, but it was difficult to gather without mountains and rivers. Therefore, it was extremely scattered, and it was difficult to light up the spiritual point. If one were to cling to a place, after a long time, the spiritual opportunity would be exhausted. Taoist Jin smiled and said, "Back then, my ancestor once heard that a Vedanta from beyond the heavens had captured the northern underworld black turtle to guard the sect, and he was inspired. Coincidentally, there was a giant turtle in the middle of the sea, who knows how many tens of thousands of years old. When this creature stood on the bottom of the sea, it raised its head and breathed in the air of the wind and clouds. When it sleeps and wakes up, thousands of years would pass. If we could refine it into our sect's spiritual beast, it could suppress the land. Just the spiritual opportunity it would attract every day would be enough for a sect's cultivators." Zhang Yan thought for a while and understood the plan. Once such a giant creature refined its qi, the spiritual opportunity needed would be immeasurable. If hundreds of people used it to cultivate, it would not be a problem at all. At the same time, it could prevent the giant turtle from growing too big. He dared to say that if this could be done, not only would everyone benefit, the future generations would also benefit, and the leader would also use it to achieve Tao. He sighed in his heart. This ancestor's goal might not be limited to this. Once this precedent was set, it would definitely lead the future generations to follow suit, and in the future, they would be able to form another sect on the sea. After tens of thousands of years, they might not be weaker than the sects on the land. Floating astronomy. Chapter 906. Zhang Yan couldn't help but think of himself when he saw the actions of this wise man. Going where no one has gone before, opening up places no one has opened up. Isn't the Tao I seek also the same? As he thought about it, he felt something in his heart. However, when he wanted to know more about it, the feeling disappeared. He thought about it calmly and knew that the opportunity had not yet arrived, so he did not force it. He turned his thoughts back and said, "Your honorable sect's ancestors' move was truly a good plan. If it succeeds, it will be praised by the later generations for tens of thousands of years." Taoist Jin smiled bitterly. It's a pity that when my ancestor wanted to do this, an enemy came knocking on his door. After a tough battle, he managed to repel the enemy, but he was injured and could only rest in the palace. It was not until a few hundred years later, before he was reincarnated, that he hurriedly went to the door and injured the giant turtle. Before he left, he ordered his disciples to fulfill this wish. He sighed that after tens of thousands of years, no one from the younger generation could cultivate to the level of my ancestor. I'm ashamed to face my ancestors. Zhang Yan shook his head. Just now, he could see that this spiritual opportunity was borrowed from the giant tree under his feet. It was more than enough to support Shinren Yuanying, but it was impossible to get someone from the heavenly abode. Without such a cultivator, it would not be easy to subdue the giant turtle. But then again, if the younger generation of the Palace of Revelation really wanted to fulfill the ancestors' wish, they might have found a way. But the problem was with the giant tree under their feet. With a way out, the cultivators were content with the status quo and would not fight to the death. He shook his head and asked, "Palace Master Jin, I see that the giant tree under your feet is very strange. Can you tell me where it came from?" Taoist Jin hurriedly said, "There's nothing inconvenient about it. My ancestor used a treasure to exchange for this tree with a cultivator from beyond the heavens. It was said that it was plucked from a divine tree called Dachuan. Don't look at the giant tree now. When it fell into my ancestor's hands, it was only a leaf. After tens of thousands of years, it has grown to this size." After he finished, his expression changed slightly and he called for a servant girl beside him. He said, "Take my golden axe. Go get a tall branch." The maidservant obeyed and left. In less than the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, she returned with a jade plate in her hand. On the plate was a green branch. The branches and leaves were strong and healthy. It was full of vitality. Taoist Jin ordered him to bring the jade plate to Zhang Yan. He cupped his fists and said, "It is fate that we meet. My illumination palace is isolated from the world and has nothing good in it. Only this divine wood is presentable, so I'll give it to you." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, then took out a jade box from his sleeve, placed it on the table, and said with a smile, "It is impolite not to reciprocate. My master is an expert in alchemy, and this is a treasure pill that he personally refined. There are more than 1,000 pills of various sizes, each with their own unique effects. Today I will give it to you." Hearing this, Taoist Jin's eyes lit up. He inherited the lineage of ancient cultivators, so he had many methods to consume pills to increase his cultivation. However, even though there were many treasures on the sea, because most of the pill recipes required plants on land, there were very few that could be used by his own sect. Even if he managed to refine them, their medicinal effects were limited. Now that he had these pills, there was hope for his sect's disciples who had stagnated in their cultivation to advance. He cupped his fists and said, "I will accept your generous gift, Taoist." He felt that he had gained a great advantage this time, so he added, "Do you have anything you need? I will do my best to gather it." Zhang Yan didn't stand on ceremony and said with a smile, "Your sect traces its origins back to an ancient sect. Do you have any erosion inscriptions?" Hearing his request, Taoist Jean relaxed and said with a smile. So Taoist Jean is fond of this Tao. That's easy. My illumination palace has many erosion inscriptions left behind by our ancestors. I will order someone to fetch them for you. He immediately gave the order. Not long after, a strong man came in with a large jar. Taoist Jean waved his hand and dismissed him. He stepped forward and opened the lid of the jar. Pointing at the jade scrolls inside, he said, "Are you satisfied, Taoist Jean?" Zhang Yan took a look and said in surprise, "There are so many?" Taoist Jean said proudly, "These erosion inscriptions were brought out by our ancestors from the sect's treasury. Some were even written by our ancestors." Zhang Yan's expression turned solemn. He cupped his fists and said, "This is too much." Taoist Jean shook his head and said, "The Tao of erosion inscriptions also requires talent. There is no one in our sect who is skilled in this Tao. Leaving them in my place would only be gathering dust. I might as well give them to you." Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and put them away. Seeing that he accepted them, Taoist Jean put the medicinal pills into his sleeve. Both of them got what they needed and were happy. Taoist Jean said, "Since Taoist Jin's master is a Tao pill grandmaster, he must be well versed in this Tao. Why don't you stay with me for a few more days? I would like to learn more from you." Zhang Yan said, "I'm afraid I can't stay for long. I still have a mission from my sect. In a few days, once my mount recovers, I will leave." Taoist Jean thought about it and asked, looking at the direction Taoist Jean is going, "Are you going to the Donglai continent?" Zhang Yan said, "Yes." "Have you been there before, Taoist Jean?" Taoist Jean shook his head and said, "As the master of a palace, I cannot leave this place without permission. However, when my first junior brother went out to collect rare treasures over 100 years ago, he accidentally came across this continent. At that time, he heard a disciple calling out to him from behind, so he went back to receive him. But when he looked back, all he saw was the vast ocean and no trace of the celestial mountain." Zhang Yan smiled slightly. The Donglai continent was independent of the 8 continents. In ancient times, there were many rumors that it was a celestial mountain from beyond the seas. Because it drifted, sometimes hidden, sometimes small. Since ancient times, very few people had been able to reach it, and there were very few records of it. To find this continent, apart from waiting for a special time, some other methods were needed. For those who did not know the reason, they could only enter this place by chance. Taoist Jean looked at his expression and had a thought. He thought to himself, could it be that Taoist Zhang knows how to enter this continent? If so, there might be a chance to find the item that Grandmaster left in this continent. Thinking of this, his heart warmed. He cupped his hands and said, "Taoist Jean, I have a presumptuous request." Zhang Yan said, "Please speak, Taoist Jean." Taoist Jean said, "Due to the rules of the sect, it is difficult for me to leave this place. However, my lifespan is close to 800 years, and I do not have much time left. However, my disciples are trapped here and do not know how big the world is. It is a pity. Since Taoist Jean is going to Donglai, could you bring a few people with you?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "That is possible, but I have to say in advance that because of my master's orders, it is difficult for me to take care of your disciples. Please do not take offense." Taoist Jean hurriedly said, "How would I dare to ask Taoist Jean to take care of them? Just bring them to the Donglai continent. There is no need to pay attention to them when they come down." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "In that case, it is not difficult." Taoist Jean was delighted and ordered the servant beside him, "Go get Zi Kong, Zi Xiang, and junior brother Lu." The servant bowed and turned to leave. Not long after, 3 people arrived at the guest hall. The one in front was a middle-aged Taoist with dark skin and a short stature. His eyes were bright, and behind him were 2 young disciples. The one on the left was wearing a golden crown and a beautiful robe, with a jade belt around his waist. He had a jade face and red lips, and he had an imposing appearance. The one on the right was unprepossessing and wore a coarse shirt, like a servant being ordered around. Taoist Jean pointed at the middle-aged Taoist and said, "This is my junior brother Lu. Back then, he was the one who encountered the Donglai continent." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Ah, so it is Taoist Lu." Taoist Lu hurriedly returned the greeting and said, "Greetings, Jinren." At this moment, Taoist Jin shouted at the two disciples, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and greet Jinren Zhang." The two of them came forward and bowed, saying, "Greetings, Jinren Zhang." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. He gently lifted his sleeve, and two spiritual lights flew out and landed in the hands of the two. He said, "These are talismans refined by I. In times of danger, they can protect one's life." The two of them hurriedly thanked him. Taoist Jin said, "Fellow Taoist, what do you think of these two juniors of mine?" Zhang Yan glanced at them. The Golden Crown disciple had cultivated for at most more than 60 years and had already cultivated to the core transformation realm. It was already very rare to find such a person in a place where spiritual opportunity was scattered on the sea. As for the other disciple with a plain appearance, purely in terms of talent, he was actually a level higher than the Golden Crown disciple. However, he could tell at a glance that the latter had never received any excellent cultivation technique and was much weaker in terms of cultivation. Moreover, from the way he dressed, he must have a despicable status. Thus, he did not expose him and only said, "They both have excellent talent." Taoist Jin stood up and bowed. He said, "Today, I would like to ask fellow Taoists to bring the three of them with you to Donglai." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since I've already promised fellow Taoist, of course I'll carry it out. However, are you really willing to send such excellent disciples away?" Taoist Jin said seriously, "If you don't think about it, you won't amount to much." Zhang Yan smiled. He could see that there must be other reasons behind this, and it was not as simple as he made it out to be. However, this had nothing to do with him, so he did not delve into it. The few of them chatted for a long time. Seeing that it was getting late, Taoist Jin pulled Zhang Yan along to watch the dance and music. Taoist Lu and the two disciples also accompanied them, and only left at the end of the hour. The three of them came out of the palace. The Golden Crown disciple suddenly said, "Uncle Master, Master has said many times that Uncle Master is very knowledgeable. What do you think of this Jinren's cultivation? How does he compare to Master?" Taoist Lu was very honest and did not plan to save face for his senior brother at all. He sneered and said, "Senior brother's cultivation is still far from his." The Golden Crown disciple said in shock, "Could it be that he's already in the second stage?" The Taoist curled his lips and said, "What's the big deal about the second stage? I've already said that you should go out and walk around. You're always looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. The high cloud above Jinren Zhang's head is gone and his chi dynamic is smooth. One look and you can tell that he has already condensed his Dharmakaya. If he takes another step forward, he will have the same attainments as the founding master." Hearing that Zhang Yan was so powerful, the Golden Crown disciple was greatly shocked. He said uneasily, "If this person has evil intentions, wouldn't our Illumination Palace be in great danger?" Taoist Lu said disapprovingly, "It's obvious that he's from the Xianmen orthodox path. To be able to cultivate to such a level, he must be from a large sect. Why would he covet our Illumination Palace's wealth?" There was one thing he did not say. If the Illumination Palace did not even have the means to protect itself, how would it have dared to invite them in? Hearing the conversation between the two, the expression of the disciple who had been silently walking behind them couldn't help but change. He clenched his fists as if he had made up his mind about something. Chapter 907. As soon as Zhang Yan returned from the banquet, he stayed in the guest house for the night. In order to express his goodwill, Taoist Jin ordered his people to deliver a lot of good things to him. Zhang Chan looked at the rare treasures on the table and clicked his tongue, picking one up and fiddling with it from time to time. Even though he was an insect, he'd gained a great deal of knowledge while following by Zhang Yan's side, and his horizons could barely be considered to be broad. However, most of the treasures here were from the sea, and there were many that he'd never heard of or seen before, so he couldn't help but feel that it was extremely novel. At Zhang Yan's cultivation, he didn't care about these strange things, so he naturally allowed Zhang Yan to play with them. He glanced to the side and saw that the person who delivered the treasures was the young cultivator in plain clothes he saw in daytime hall. He asked in a pleasant tone, I heard fellow Taoist Jin mention your names during the day. One is Zikang, and the other is Zixiang. Which one are you? The young cultivator bowed and said, Thank you for asking. I am Jin Zixiang, and Jin Zikang is my clan brother. After the ceremony, he took 2 steps forward and took out a wooden plate from his sleeve. There were 2 green and tender fruits on the plate. They were plump and moist, making people salivate with just a glance. He held it up high and said, Taoist master, these are green fruits that grew on the divine tree in my palace. Don't underestimate the size of the divine tree, but this fruit only grows once every 1,000 years. When we cultivators eat it, our vision will improve and our lifespan will increase by 100 years. It was specially ordered by the palace lord to pick it and give it to Taoist master. When Zhang Yan saw that the other party had given him 2 of these rare items, it was clear that this trip was very important to him. He nodded and said, Please thank fellow Taoist Jin on my behalf when we return. At this time, Zhang Chan picked up a golden conch from the table and asked, Fellow Taoist, what's your name? Do you know what this thing is used for? Jin Zixiang turned his head to take a look and said with a smile, This thing is called Human Desire Law Conch. When you blow on it, it can release 5-colored mist. When you are inside, whatever you wish for will come true. That's why it has another name, Wish Comes True. Within 100 steps. It can charm people into that illusion, and it's impossible to guard against it. Zhang Chan's eyes lit up. This is an interesting object. Let me try. He puffed out his cheeks. He blew out a breath. Sure enough, a wisp of colorful mist flew out. It enveloped his body. After about a quarter of an hour, he dispersed the fog around him. Smacking his lips twice, he touched his still shriveled belly and said, Although it's delicious, it's a pity that it's all a dream. Still, it's not bad to use it to relieve boredom. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Since you like it, then take it. Zhang Chan grinned and said, Thank you, master. As he spoke, he kept it in his bosom. Jin Zixiang looked at him as if nothing had happened. He looked calm on the surface, but he was very surprised in his heart. This human desire conch was not as simple as he made it out to be. Because the Illumination Palace was located on the ocean, it was cut off from the rest of the world. Most of what the disciples knew about the outside world came from ancient books. Although it lacked the tumult of the mortal world, and their minds were mostly clear, it also lacked experience. This object was used by the cultivators in the palace to train their Tao heart. In the past, when disciples of the same sect entered the illusion, no matter how skilled they were, they would still be confused by the illusion. After the spell was dispelled, the master would have to find a way to stabilize their state of mind. This would take at least a few days, and at most a year and a half, before they could stabilize their mind. But he didn't think that after this experience, Zhang Chan was as if nothing had happened. He thought to himself, I didn't think that even a child by Jinren Zhang's side would be so amazing. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve, and a flaming flag floated in front of him. He said, Although this flag isn't a magical treasure, it was personally refined by me. With a thought, I can set up a restrictive array around you. Now, I'll give it to you for protection. Jin Zixiang didn't accept the flag. After a moment of silence, he knelt down with a thud and kowtowed. He said, I beg Jinren to let me stay. Zhang Yan's gaze shifted downwards. He said calmly, I've already agreed to bring you there. What's the point of asking? Unless Palace Head Jin has changed to someone else? Jin Zixiang shook his head. I have no intention of going to the Donglai continent. I only wish to be by your side in the future. Zhang Yan said plainly, You are a disciple of the Illumination Palace. Even if you don't have a master, I have no intention of accepting a disciple. Jin Zixiang was currently buried in the ground. Upon hearing this, his body trembled. He said bitterly, I know this is an unreasonable request. I don't dare to hope for superior martial arts. I only hope that when Jinren leaves Donglai, you can bring me along. Zhang Yan understood what he meant. He frowned and said, You want to leave the Illumination Palace? Jin Zixiang said, I don't want to be a traitor to my master. It's just that the Illumination Palace has a rule. Once a disciple of the branch reaches the core transformation realm, if he wishes to continue his cultivation, he can no longer stay in the palace. He has to leave and establish his own sect. Since I have to leave sooner or later, I've decided to repay the kindness of raising and teaching me. But the world is so big and I don't know where to go. I'd like to follow you for a few days. Zhang Yan said, I've told fellow Jin before that I have orders from my sect. I don't know when I'll be able to leave. If it takes a long time, it might take hundreds of years. Are you still willing to follow me? Jin Zixiang was startled. He thought, even though my cultivation is low, my lifespan is not more than 100 years. Once I reach Donglai, even if it's difficult to become a disciple of Zhenren, I can still go around and find a good master. He kowtowed again and said, I'm willing. Zhang Yan continued, I see that your desire to cultivate is very difficult, but I want to ask you, are you seeking longevity, or seeking the true path? Jin Zixiang raised his head and replied seriously, I've made up my mind to use my entire life to fulfill my ancestors' wish. I hate that I'm not a direct descendant, so it's difficult for me to obtain the true path. That's why I'm eager to leave this world and find superior martial arts. Zhang Yan nodded and sighed. The direct descendant possessed superior martial arts, but could only sigh and sigh, not willing to take the risk. On the other hand, the branch had high aspirations and wanted to pull themselves together, but there was no way forward. He thought for a moment, then looked over and said, It's a pity that the senior's wish cannot be fulfilled. So, I'll grant you your request. Jin Zixiang was overcome with emotion. He knocked his forehead on the ground and said, Zhenren's kindness is something that I can't repay even if I die 10,000 times. Zhang Yan said, There's no need to repay me. Just remember what you've said today. Zhang Yan stayed at the Illumination Palace for about 10 days. When he saw that the twin dragons had recovered, he bid farewell to Taoist Jin. On the second day, when they were about to depart, Taoist Jin personally led over 100 disciples to send them off. Taoist Lu looked at the dragon carriage in the sky and said to Jin Zikang and Jin Zixiang, It's hard to say when we'll be back. If you have anything to say, go ahead and say it. Jin Zixiang walked over to Taoist Jin, knelt down and respectfully kowtowed 3 times. Taoist Jin had already received Zhang Yan's greeting and knew his choice. He sighed and helped him up. He said gently, Zixiang, although I'm the head of a school, I can only follow the rules set by my ancestors. I hope you won't hate me. In the future, follow Zhenren Zhang well. One day, I hope to see the wishes of my ancestors come true. Jin Zixiang remembered that Taoist Jin had raised him since he was young. Other than the fact that Taoist Jin had never taught him superior techniques, he treated him like his own son. Now that they were about to depart, all the memories flashed before his eyes. He couldn't help but say in a trembling voice, Uncle, please forgive me for not being filial. On the other hand, Jin Zikang's hand was held by a beautiful woman. The woman was sobbing as if she couldn't bear to let him go. Jin Zikang said impatiently, I'm only going to gain experience. It's not a life and death separation. Mother, why do you have to be like this? Outsiders will laugh at us. The beautiful woman stopped crying and wiped her tears with a handkerchief. She turned to Jin Zixiang and said, Zixiang, you have to look after your brother. Don't let him suffer. Jin Zixiang cupped his fists calmly and said, As long as I'm here, I will do my best to protect my brother. Jin Zikang laughed and said, 11th brother, your skills are not as good as mine. Just take care of yourself when the time comes. Taoist Jin said, All right, don't keep Taoist Zhang waiting for too long. Let's go. Zikang, listen to your uncle Master Lu and don't force yourself. Jin Zikang said, I understand. The woman looked at the 3 of them going up the tower. Thinking about it, she still felt sad. She complained, Master, you're doing this on a whim. You can't live peacefully in the palace, but you want Zikang to go out and gain experience. Who knows when he'll come back? Taoist Jin frowned and said, What do you know? The Donglai continent has our sect's treasure. It's left behind by our founder. It's just that we can't enter it. If we don't take advantage of this opportunity, how will we get another chance in the future? The woman muttered, Why ask Zikang to go? Can't we just ask Lu Qinyuan to go? He's already someone who signed a blood pact. Are we still afraid of him playing tricks? Taoist Jean was annoyed and scolded, I have my own plans. Don't you dare say anything else. Seeing his stern expression, the woman did not dare to say anything else. At the same time, 100 miles away from the Illumination Palace, there was a cloud of mist floating on the ocean. Within it was a large whale, and on its back was a hut. Two Taoists were playing a game of chess. One of the scholars in white tossed the chess piece in his hand. Channeling his mana, he looked into the sky and said, I think the owner of the dragon carriage is the one going to Donglai? The other person wore a hemp robe and a bamboo hat. His face looked weathered. He also looked up and said, Of course. The scholar in white chuckled and said, Back then, there were many disciples under our founder, but all the benefits went to the Jean family. This ancestral treasure belongs to you. The Taoist in hemp said in a low voice, Lu Qinyuan is not difficult to deal with. It's just that Taoist Zhang seems to be a third-degree cultivator. He's not someone to be trifled with. The scholar in white agreed, That's right. This kind of person cannot be offended unless it's absolutely necessary. Once he brings Lu Qinyuan and the other two into the Donglai continent and separate, it won't be too late for us to find him then. At this moment, a rumble came from the sky. He looked again and saw that the dragon carriage had broken through the high cloud and was heading to the extreme heaven. The two of them looked at each other and did not speak. They immediately joined hands to cast their spells. After a short while, the hut under their feet suddenly flew up and also pierced through the clouds. When they reached the high cloud at the same time, they saw that the dragon carriage was already far away. The scholar exclaimed, I didn't expect it to be so fast. If I didn't bring the finger chi fragrance, I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to catch up. The Taoist in hemp said, Enough with the idle chatter. Quickly light the treasure incense. The scholar in white smiled and said, Senior apprentice brother, don't be hasty. He unhurriedly took out a large stick of incense from his bosom. With a slight turn of his hand, a plume of white smoke flew out. However, it did not go up into the sky. Instead, it turned into a thin thread and shot towards the southeast. The direction it pointed towards was the direction of the dragon carriage. Chapter 908. After the flood dragon carriage left the Illumination Palace, it continued to float on the sea for more than a year. On this day, Zhang Chan walked into the alchemy room and bowed. Master, the two dragons are complaining that they are tired. They won't leave no matter what. May I ask if we can let them go down to hunt for food? Zhang Yan smiled. I'm afraid that the two of them are injured from traveling in the storm. Pass on my words. Let them go down and eat their fill for a month. Zhang Chan acknowledged and went down to pass on the order. The two dragons' favorite food was mostly monsters in the sea. However, the ocean was vast, and most of their time was spent looking for food. In the past 10 days, they could barely fill their stomachs. Now that they heard that they could finally eat their fill after a month, they were overjoyed. In an instant, they broke free from the reins and rushed down from the clouds into the waves. Zhang Chan snorted. He felt that the two dragons were wild and unruly. They needed to be controlled, so he couldn't be nice to them. He returned to the alchemy room and suggested, Master, in my humble opinion, should we be more lenient with the two dragons? Zhang Yan smiled. I have my reasons. Zhang Chan didn't understand at first, but then he realized that the journey was coming to an end and they were about to reach Donglai. Right at this moment, the sound of waves crashing against each other suddenly came from below, followed by the furious roars of the two dragons. Occasionally, there were one or two howls of unknown monsters mixed in, extremely ear-piercing. He paused, then chuckled. Those two brothers must be blind. They must have run into some troublesome opponent again. The two dragons were proud of their bravery. When they went out in search of food, there were a few times when they forcefully snatched food from the mouths of other beasts. Along the way, they had fought with the beasts no less than 14 or 15 times. Judging by the commotion, they must have run into some kind of powerful water monster. The people of the Illumination Palace who lived in the lower levels of the pagoda also heard the commotion. The journey on the sea was boring. Priest Lu was fine. He was already a Yuanian cultivator and had a profound cultivation base. A year's time was nothing to him. On the other hand, Jin Kong was different. Even though he'd entered the Tao for a few decades, his temperament was still impetuous. When he heard this sound, he immediately knew what was going on, so he used the excuse of watching the battle as an excuse to run out. Taoist Lu shook his head. Seeing that Jin Xiang was still sitting in the same place, he asked with concern, "Xiang, why don't you go?" Jin Xiang respectfully replied, "I feel that my skills are not sufficient and I need more time to cultivate. I'm afraid I won't have the time to do other things." Taoist Lu looked at him a few times and said, "I know you have to work hard and have perseverance, but you don't have to sit around all day. For us cultivators, cultivation is important, but we also need to broaden our horizons and broaden our knowledge. For example, if we meet such a strong enemy in the future, we will know how to deal with it." Moreover, the two Taoist Jiao cultivators have high cultivation. It is a rare sight to see them fight with the Sea tribe. You missed it the last few times, so chances will be rare in the future. Jin Xiang understood. He stood up and sincerely said, "Thank you for your advice, Uncle Master." Taoist Lu stood up and said with a smile, "Come with me." The two of them went outside and saw a strange fish about 10 feet long among the waves. Its head was like a dolphin, and its tail was like a sparrow. There was a row of fins on its back, and both sides of the fins were spread out like wings. What was even more strange was that there was a pair of sharp claws on its abdomen. If one did not look carefully, they would not notice it. The two Jiao dragons were stepping on clouds, circling around the fish and biting it. From time to time, they would tear off a piece of scale from its opponent. Blood splattered, and the sea was filled with the smell of blood. That fish monster was extremely ferocious. Suddenly encountering a great enemy, not only did it not hide in the sea, but it flopped and leaped on the surface of the water. Its two fins flapped and created huge waves and strong gales, creating a hua-hua sound. It actually caused the pagoda in the sky to shake. Jin Kang's expression changed. "Uncle Master, what is this?" Taoist Lu thought for a while and said, "There are many strange things in the sea. I don't know what this is." At this moment, Zhang Chan's voice came from above. "Sir, Master invites you to come up." Taoist Lu was worried that the strange fish was too strong. If they encountered a dangerous situation later, he might not be able to protect his two nephews. When he heard Zhang Yan's invitation, he was relieved and thanked him. He then swept his sleeves and brought the two up to the top of the pagoda. Zhang Yan had already left the alchemy room and was standing in front of the jade railing. When he saw them coming up, he said, "Please come here." Taoist Lu cupped his hands and brought the two to his side. Jin Kong looked down and couldn't help but ask the question in his heart. He turned around and asked, "Zhenren, what is this?" Zhang Yan smiled. "This demon has a common name, fishbird life, or birdfish life. In fact, it is a demon bird that has cultivated for thousands of years and has yet to transform. After eating a demon fish, its vital energy resonates with the vital energy in its stomach, and then it transforms into this kind of creature. This ferocious monster has the best of both. It is born as a fish, then becomes a bird, and then it gains the form of a bird and a bird. The one in front of us has wet scales like feathers, bright and flamboyant, and can also control the wind and qi. It must be more than 1,000 years old." Taoist Lu praised sincerely, "Although I was born in the sea, I am not as knowledgeable as you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This is a strange species of the Donglai continent. It is not strange that you do not know about it. Even I only knew about it because of my ancestors' notes." Taoist Lu was surprised. A strange species of the Donglai continent? Fellow Taoist, could it be that we're about to reach our destination? When Jin Kong and Jin Xiang heard this, they could not care less about the fierce battle on the sea, and looked over with anticipation. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "We are almost there, but before we enter the continent, there are a few things I have to say to you." Taoist Lu solemnly cupped his hands and said, "Please speak, my friend." Zhang Yan said, "Legend has it that the Donglai continent was originally a fallen star, and later became a celestial mountain in the sea. It was also set up by a powerful person, so it is hard to find. Our ancestors speculated that it is between the real world and the real world. It will only appear in a few special places on certain days. When the time comes, we only need to rush to that place and we will be able to obtain the opportunity to enter. The Donglai continent only appeared once every 9 years. He had read the writings of his ancestors and knew that it would appear in 5 places. 2 of them were in the 9th heaven, and the other was in the underground abyss. He could not go to either of them right now. Fortunately, the other places were above the sea, so it was not difficult to find. The direction that the dragon carriage was heading in was one of them. Taoist Lu suddenly understood and said, "I see." No wonder Taoist couldn't find it. Zhang Yan asked, "I heard that Taoist Lu almost entered the continent?" Taoist Lu sighed and said, "Yes. It was a pity that time. I was going out to sea alone, but when I saw this celestial mountain, I was excited. Behind me, I heard my disciple crying for help. When I looked back, I realized that it was just an illusion. When I turned back to look, the huge continent had disappeared without a trace." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "That's because there's a forbidden formation outside the Donglai continent. This formation isn't used to harm people, but to create all sorts of illusions. They're so minute that it's hard to tell what's real and what's fake. Even cultivators will unknowingly be controlled by it. Taoist Lu was trapped in one of them, which is called the turning back restriction. When you encounter this restriction, it is easy to deal with. No matter what happens behind you, whether it is a low laugh or a call from your loved ones, you cannot turn back. Even if you feel someone blowing on the back of your neck, you cannot pay attention to it. Otherwise, you will never find the continent again." When Jin Kong heard this, he felt a little itchy on the back of his neck and unconsciously moved his shoulders. Taoist Lu, however, widened his eyes and said, "So, there is more than one type of restriction?" Zhang Yan said, "This restriction is very strange. It varies from person to person, and all of them are aimed at the weak points of a person's heart. For example, there's a restriction called silence restriction, which requires the person to not open their mouth to speak. Once they do, they will immediately be barred from entering the continent." Jin Xiang spoke at this moment. "Not speaking for a year doesn't seem to be a difficult thing for us Taoists." Taoist Lu, on the other hand, had a deep understanding. He shook his head and said, "That is because you are introverted. Some people are lively and difficult to restrict. If you do not let them speak, it will be more painful than killing them." Jin Kong said, "There is the silence restriction. Could it be that there is also the silence restriction?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Whether there is or not, I don't know either. But I'm quite lucky to have encountered these. There's a senior in my sect who once went there to investigate, and he didn't encounter anything strange. He just looked at the Donglai continent, and it took him more than 50 years to get there." Taoist Lu's expression turned solemn and said, "This? Zhenren, may I ask if this is an illusion or reality?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Illusion is also reality, and reality is also illusion." Taoist Lu nodded slightly and did not say anything. The restriction formation was aimed at the weakness of the human heart. Only by overcoming the difficulties in the heart could one pass through. From this point of view, reality and reality were the same. Zhang Yan looked at everyone, and his gaze lingered on Jin Xiang for a while longer. He said slowly, "There is a saying, it is easy to avoid the mortal tribulation, but difficult to pass through the heart. I am only guiding you. As for whether or not you can pass through, it is up to you. Outsiders cannot help you." Jin Kong was puzzled and said, "Then why didn't Zhenren bring it forward? At least we can be on guard." Taoist Lu scolded, "Don't talk nonsense. I am afraid that you will be stuck in it for too long and will not be able to get rid of the heart barrier." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Only those with extremely firm Tao hearts would be able to act as if they didn't see it, and act as if they didn't hear it. It isn't a good thing for people like you to know about it in advance, and it will only cause you to be entangled in it and sink deeper and deeper into it." At this point, he looked at the ocean for a while and said, "This demon is about to be defeated. I still have something to do, so I will return to the pavilion first." Everyone hurriedly bowed and sent him off. When they turned around, they suddenly saw a hut in the clouds. Taoist Lu could not help but frown. Walking on the sky sea, the view was wide and the horizon was wide. Even if the two parties were miles apart, it was not difficult to see each other. In the beginning, the hut was still somewhat concealed. Later on, when they realized that no one came to check on them, they no longer hid. In the past month, because they had encountered quite a few thunderclouds and storms along the way, they followed them even more closely. Jin Kong looked at the place with hostility and said, "Uncle, it is those two again. They must be after the Grandmaster's treasure. Are we just going to let them follow us? Why don't we inform Zhenrenzhang and let him deal with them?" Taoist Lu shook his head and said, "Zhenrenzhang's cultivation is profound, how would he not know? Just now, he is leaving on purpose. He does not want to be involved in this matter. Let them be. If they don't know the key, even if they follow us, they may not be able to enter Donglai continent." Chapter 909. After Zhang Yan left the three people of Illumination Palace behind and returned to the pagoda, the battle in the sea quickly came to an end. Although Niao Xing could be considered a natural variant, he was still not a match for the two flood dragons. In the beginning, he relied on his ferocious nature and was able to fight evenly with them, but the more he fought, the weaker he became, and the thought of retreating appeared in his mind. With a shake of his body, he shook the water and forced the two dragons back a little. Then, he spread his fins and hissed threateningly before lowering his body and retreating into the water. The reason why the two flood dragons had been wandering around and fighting before was to exhaust its vitality and energy. Now that their plan had succeeded, they obviously wouldn't let it go so easily. However, they also knew that a cornered dog would do something desperate, so they didn't plan to immediately kill it. One of the dragons shouted, "Brother, this big guy is enough for us to eat for a few days. Let him escape for a while and let out some blood along the way. When the time comes, we can make our move. This will save us a lot of energy." The other dragon waved its tail and disagreed. "What a pity. Just now, we've already let out a lot of blood. If we let out more, we won't be able to drink a few bowls of blood soup. If I knew this big guy was so useless, I would have taken him down just now." The first dragon scolded, "Useless thing. Zhenren, you let us wait for a month. With our abilities, do you think we won't be able to find food? Hurry up and get me down there, don't let him get away." The two dragons made a ruckus and rushed into the sea in pursuit. About an hour later, a large pool of blood spread out on the surface of the sea. With another loud bang, the two flood dragons broke out of the water with the corpse in their claws. Then, they began to tear the corpse apart in midair. This scene shocked the three people of Illumination Palace who were watching from the outside. Jin Zikong murmured, "Luckily, there have never been dragons like this around my palace. Otherwise, I don't know how to defend myself." Taoist Lu chuckled and patted him on the shoulder, saying, "These two Taoist Jiao are more than that. Nephew, you have underestimated the Illumination Palace. The Palace Lord and I are limited by our natural endowments, and we are unable to cultivate many of our cultivation methods to a high level. Even so, what we have now is enough to protect the sect." Jin Zikong suddenly asked, "Uncle, I don't know which one is stronger than the sect behind Zhenrenzhang?" Lu Daoist frowned. He felt troubled. After 10,000 years, the Illumination Palace had long since become lifeless. The reason why they were able to continue was because they relied on the strength of the direct bloodline in the sect. The branch bloodlines were unable to surpass them. The sect was located overseas. There were no powerful enemies around. He had heard from Zhang Yan that the sect behind him was also a major sect in the Donghua continent. That was someone who could stand out from the other sects and establish a foothold in the world. How could his own family compare? Just now, those words were only to boost their morale. However, it was not appropriate for him to lie, so he avoided it and said, "Our sect is an ancient Xianmen. Our cultivation methods are not weaker than any other sect in the world." Then he changed the topic and said, "There is no point in telling you all this now. In the future, when your cultivation reaches a certain level, You will naturally understand. After waiting on the sea for a month, the two Jiao Jiao finally recovered their vitality, and the group continued their journey. After flying east for a few days, Zhang Yan figured that they were not far from the border of the continent. He ordered the Jiao Jiao carriage to descend from the high cloud and travel on the sea. That day at noon he ordered the carriage to stop. He used his mana and silently sensed the surroundings. Although the spiritual opportunity on the sea was scattered, there were still traces to follow. Moreover, each had its own path, and there was no single place that was the same. The place beneath his feet was already very close to what that senior had said, but the details seemed to be right, but they weren't. He pinched his fingers and calculated, then looked around and said, although the spiritual opportunity is not the same as what was written in the records, but this location should be the same. Those slight differences should be due to the movement of the spiritual opportunity over the past thousands of years. After thinking about it, this was just his own guess, and the real situation might not be like this. To be safe, he had to check the surroundings more. Thinking about this, he ordered the Jiao Jiao carriage to move again. This time, it took another 3 to 4 days, and he did find a few suspicious locations. The Donglai continent revealed a corner of the door, and the time it stopped was not fixed. It could be a few hours or a few days, the length was uncertain, and there was no way to figure out the pattern. As for whether there were other situations, no one could completely understand it. He was not willing to pin the opportunity to enter the continent on luck. Otherwise, if he missed it, he could only go to the next location. It was just that these few places were quite far apart. With his speed, it was not easy to travel all the way in a few hours. Fortunately, he had his own solution. He brought Zhang Chan closer and asked, "Have you memorized all the places we passed through in front of us?" Zhang Chan said, "I have memorized them." Zhang Yan said, "Split out a few groups of insect soldiers and wait in those places. If there is any movement, quickly come and inform me." Zhang Chan said, "Don't worry, master. I will definitely keep it in mind, and I won't make any mistakes." Zhang Yan waved his hand and ordered him to make the arrangements. In this way, there would be insect soldiers watching at all times. Even if his previous guess was wrong, he would be able to rush over in time. After thinking about it carefully and making sure that there was nothing left out, he put the matter aside. Another 5 or 6 days passed, and everything was set up properly. Zhang Yan felt that there was nothing left out, so he found the 3 people from the Illumination Palace and said, "In less than half a month, the Donglai continent will appear above this sea region. However, once it gets close to the array outside the mountain, it will enter the heart barrier. I am indebted to Taoist Jin, but I don't want to see you make any mistakes that might endanger your lives. I will do my best to protect you, but there are many barriers that cannot be broken with mana. When the time comes, you will have to be more careful." Taoist Lu thought about it for a while, then cupped his hands and said, "The 3 of us are already grateful that you brought us here. We don't dare to ask for more." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "The 3 of you don't have to think too much for the next few days. Cleanse your qi and clear your mind, calm the void, and clear your mind so that you won't be taken advantage of by external forces." Taoist Lu knew that he was right. After thanking him and seeing that there was nothing else, he did not stay any longer and led the 3 away. Outside, he said to his 2 nephews, "The heart barrier cannot be overestimated, nor can it be underestimated. Now that we know the way to enter the continent, there is no need to rush. The 2 of you are still young, so you won't have a chance this time. Next time, you can try your luck again. Do not be presumptuous and force your way through." His tone suddenly became stern, a complete change from his previous lazy and unruly attitude. Jin Zikang and Jin Zixiang both agreed. More than 10 days passed as the crowd waited. On the 13th day, Zhang Yan suddenly felt an inexplicable feeling in his heart. He waved his sleeves and walked out of the pavilion. The wind and waves that never stopped around him had unknowingly stopped. A bright moon rose. Not far away, there was a celestial mountain floating on the sea. The mirror sea was far away. Wrapped in snow and mist, the mountain was tall and beautiful, like a goddess descending to the mortal world. The 3 people from the Illumination Palace did as they were told. When he hurried up to the pavilion, he was instantly attracted by the miraculous scene on the sea. After a moment of absent-mindedness, Jin Zikong said excitedly, "Is that the Donglai continent?" Taoist Lu took a few glances and shook his head. No. Jin Zikong was stunned. "What's wrong?" Zhang Yan smiled and turned around. He pointed behind the three of them and said, "All of you, look over there." The three of them turned around and were stunned. They found that there was also an illusion of a mountain, but it was hidden in the thick fog and not a trace of moonlight could reach it. Taoist Lu looked at it attentively and finally seemed relieved. He said, "It should be here." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Before passing the mental barrier, there are still 2 barriers to pass. This is the first barrier, the void boundary barrier. If the person who comes is deceived by this illusory image and follows it, then they will be going in the wrong direction and will miss the opportunity to enter the continent." This barrier was not difficult to pass. There was no sign of life in the illusion. On the contrary, if one went to the real place and observed carefully, they would find spiritual qi fluctuating. When a cultivator came here, as long as he was calm and not distracted by the beautiful scenery, he would be able to distinguish the real from the fake. In fact, in the ancient book, this barrier was only mentioned in 1 sentence. It was obvious that the person who wrote it did not take it seriously. In his opinion, when a cultivator cultivated to the point where he could come to the Donglai continent, there was no need to say much about this. On the contrary, if he went over, he might as well turn back as soon as possible to avoid losing his life. Jin Zikong said with a sudden realization, "So this is the real place?" He widened his eyes and looked for a while, but he was disappointed. "This is not as good as the illusion." Taoist Lu snorted and said, "The illusion of the mortal world can confuse one's mind. If you insist on it, then you are not a cultivator." Zhang Yan smiled and waved his sleeve lightly. The 2 dragons knew what was going on and turned the carriage around, heading in the opposite direction. After traveling for a long time, the fog in front of them gradually dissipated. Finally, they could see the shape of the mountains clearly. The 3 people from Xianzhou Palace were stunned. There were 3 mountains in front of them, and no matter how they looked at them, they looked exactly the same. Zhang Yan said with his hands behind his back, "This barrier is called the Righteous Path Barrier. The entrance to the continent is in one of the mountains. The rest of the people are on the wrong path. If they go the wrong way, they will not be able to enter the continent." Taoist Lu thought for a while and said slowly, "Where my heart is, it is the righteous path." Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist, you are right." The dragon carriage did not change its path and went straight to one of the mountains in front of them. The 2 Jin brothers did not understand. Jin Zikong looked left and right and whispered, "Uncle, what is the coincidence of this barrier?" Taoist Lu said in a deep voice, "I can't explain it to you now. You only need to know that the place we are going to is the main gate." Zhang Yan smiled. These 3 doors could be fake, but they could also be real. However, those who passed through had to be absolutely convinced that what they were doing was right. Only then could they pass through. If there was even the slightest bit of doubt, they would be blocked outside. They naturally had a firm Taoist heart, but the 2 Jin brothers might not be so. That was why Taoist Lu did not say anything. Not long after, the carriage arrived in front of the mountain. At this moment, Zhang Yan spoke up to remind everyone, "The first 2 trials are easy. The 3rd trial is the most difficult trial, the knocking the heart trial. Everyone is different, so everyone needs to be careful." The 3 of them were unconsciously worried. However, after a long time had passed, the 2 Jin brothers still did not feel anything. They were at a loss and did not know what to do. Only Taoist Lu was slightly better, but he only frowned, as if he was caught in a difficult problem. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. This method of invading people's hearts was silent. If one's cultivation was not high, he would not be able to sense the prohibition. But for people like him, it was as if something was imprinted into his heart from the void. He immediately knew the reason for this prohibition. The prohibition he needed was called the beheading prohibition. It was simple. If he wanted to reach the Donglai continent, he had to do one thing, which was to behead everyone around him. Otherwise, it would be difficult to pass. Chapter 9-10. When Zhang Yan sensed the intent of this Tao heart restriction, he couldn't help but raise his brows. Not to mention the fact that he was entrusted by Taoist Jin to bring the 3 people from Xianzhou Palace here. Even if they had a grudge against each other, if they really wanted to be ruthless, they would have to ask for the truth first. They wouldn't kill for no reason. But if he complied, it would go against his conscience. If he didn't, then it would be difficult to pass through this restriction. He thought about it carefully and already had a solution. He immediately sent a few telepathic messages and waved his sleeves, dispersing the mana. In an instant, the world spun. Zhang Chan, the 2 dragons, and Xianzhou Palace were all teleported away with this wave of his hand. He smiled. Since he had to behead the people around him to pass, then if there was no one around him, whose head would he behead? Taoist Lu felt his vision blur, and the scenery in front of him changed drastically. There were 4 tall mountains in front of him, like pillars, rising straight up. They didn't look like they were formed before, but like someone had buried them here with force. But after experiencing the previous 2 lights, he didn't find it strange that something strange had happened in Donglai continent. He looked to his left and right and saw his 2 nephews standing beside him. Just now, after hearing Zhang Yan's telepathic message, he knew that he had sent them away because of the Tao heart restriction, but he would have to go down by himself. He said, "The 2 of you, come with me." Jin Zikong looked at the mysterious land shrouded in celestial clouds, but he hesitated to go forward. He had cultivated for decades, but had never traveled outside. In reality, Xianzhou Palace didn't like it either. There were many monsters on the sea, and for a direct descendant like him, who would dare to let him go out as he pleased? After experiencing the initial excitement, a strong sense of homesickness rose within him at this moment. It was as if once he entered this continent he would never be able to come out, and he would never see his parents and siblings again. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel afraid. He didn't go forward, but took a few steps back. Taoist Lu sensed something was wrong and asked, "What's wrong?" Jin Zikong stammered, "Uncle, I won't go. I won't be going. How about returning now?" Taoist Lu's face darkened. Just as he was about to scold him, he realized that his nephew might have been affected by the heart restriction. Taking a deep breath, Zhang Xian was just about to console Jin Zixiang when he saw the dumbfounded Jin Zixiang by the side. He asked, "Zixiang, how are you?" Jin Zixiang pointed forward and said with a trembling voice, "Martial uncle, look." Lu Daoist turned around and was dumbfounded. The clouds in front of them were gradually dissipating, and they saw that there was actually a towering mound on top of the 4 pillars. The mound was black in color and shaped like a round lid. It was completely bare, and no vegetation could be seen. However, when he looked up again, he saw a snake-like head poking out from the mound shell and disappearing into the clouds. How was this a Gaoyu? It was clearly a giant turtle. Less than an hour after the carriage entered the gate, a hut appeared in the clouds. The 2 Taoists who had followed Zhang Yan and the rest had also arrived. The scholar in white leaned to one side, protecting the treasured incense in his hand. He waited for the smoke to fly away and enter the clouds, disappearing in an instant. He looked down for a while and said excitedly, "Shixiang, I've searched, it should be here." The hemp-clothed Taoist was also excited. He couldn't help but stand up from the praying mat and take a few steps forward. After looking for a while, he frowned and said, "But I can't see anything clearly. Could it be that they purposely made up a mystery?" The white-robed scholar smiled and said, "Senior martial brother, you worry too much. We have already followed them for a year. If they wanted to make a move, they would have done it long ago. Senior martial brother, take a look." He used his finger to point around, such a huge cloud that covers at least 1,000 miles, but it actually appeared out of nowhere. There were no signs at all. Even if the person from the other continent is skilled, he probably can't do this, right? The hemp-clothed Taoist thought about it and felt that he was thinking too much. "All right, then let's quickly chase after them. Don't let Lu Qianyuan take the initiative." The white-robed scholar said firmly, "Of course not." He immediately chanted and the hut beneath his feet moved with mana. With a slight tremble, it turned into a ball of white smoke and carried the two of them into the gate. Once inside, the two of them saw Bright Moon Celestial Mountain in front of them and were stunned. Although they didn't know what the Void Realm Gate was, to be able to roam freely above Muddy Ocean until now meant that they were truly skilled. In terms of cultivation, they were even higher than Taoist Lu, so they immediately felt that something was wrong. The white-robed scholar sneered and said, "Such an illusory scene, and you want to hide it from us?" The moment he thought about it, he immediately felt an inspiration. He turned the hut around and looked behind him. He laughed and said, "This is the right path." Not long after, they arrived at the Righteous Path gate again. They both sneered and passed through it without hesitation. However, after he leaped over the mountain, a profound feeling suddenly arose in the bottom of his heart, and he suddenly knew that he'd entered into a restriction formation. This restriction before him was called the solitary restriction, and if he wanted to enter the continent, then he had to kill his senior brother first. This feeling was extremely clear, as if it was engraved in his heart. He was instantly stunned. Although senior martial brother and I aren't brothers, we have helped each other all these years. How can I do this? He subconsciously looked at the hemp-clothed Taoist, but he couldn't see the change in the other's expression. His heart couldn't help but shudder. I have this restriction in my heart. Senior martial brother's mana is higher than mine, so he might also have this restriction. I don't want to kill him, but what if he wants to kill me? When he thought of this, his body couldn't help but tighten. Cold sweat broke out on his back, and he secretly became vigilant. However, the more he walked forward, the more uneasy he felt. In the end, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a hint of fierceness. He thought to himself, "Senior martial brother, this can't be blamed on me. The ancestral treasure has fallen into the hands of the Jin family. We outer branch disciples will never have a chance to rise again. Since only one of us can go, why don't you give this chance to me?" When this thought rose, he couldn't hold back anymore. He gathered all the mana in his body and suddenly opened his mouth. A white pill flew out and hit the hemp-clothed Taoist's back. The latter seemed to be defenseless. Without making a sound, he fell straight into the sea. His corpse rose and fell with the waves, and was swept away by a wave. There was no longer a trace of him. After Zhang Yan sent everyone around him away, the beheading restriction was naturally broken. The scenery in front of him changed again, and suddenly a straight sea path opened up. The mountains on both sides faced each other, as if the door was open to welcome guests. However, he didn't relax. Instead, his expression froze. Although the restriction from before was gone, there was actually another restriction now. This restriction was very troublesome for him, and it was called the mountain gazing restriction. Coincidentally, it was the trial that the senior from before had experienced. If one continued down this path, if he went down this path, he wouldn't know when it would end. Maybe it would be decades, or centuries, or even worse, when his lifespan is exhausted, he might not be able to go through. According to the records of the predecessors, as long as the restriction was broken, there would be no more obstacles. But now it seemed that wasn't the case. He closed his eyes and pondered. The problem should be the method to break the restriction just now. If he didn't break the restriction, then he would just cut off the path, or there wouldn't be any changes. There wouldn't be another restriction like this. Then there was only one possibility. The beheading restriction didn't want him to kill people, but emotions. Thinking back to the records of the predecessors, many things that he didn't understand before were now answered. He suddenly understood. The person who set up the restriction in Donglai continent. Maybe it was a senior who followed the path of emotionlessness. If one wasn't on the same path, it would be difficult to enter. No wonder there were many great virtues in the past. However, there were very few records about this place. As for those seniors who practiced the heartless path, they viewed others as nothing. If there were no clear benefits for their own families, they probably wouldn't leave a word or two behind. He snorted coldly. Donglai continent was not the land of just one family. If others could go there, he could go there too. What's more, he still had his master's orders. Now that he had eliminated 4 demons, He only needed one more to complete his mission. Duan-Wu stopped at the last moment. After deciphering the corrosive runes, gradually he was able to comprehend the profundities of heaven and earth. The opportunity that he had been searching for seemed to be here. Since I can't enter immediately, I'll use a roundabout method. Just as he was about to act, he saw a figure approaching from afar. The figure bowed and greeted, "Old Master." Zhang Yan used his mana to take a look and saw that it was indeed Zhang Chan. He asked, "Why did you come back? Did you pass the test of your heart?" Zhang Chan scratched his head and said, "I don't think I sensed anything." Zhang Yan frowned slightly. Although Zhang Chan was the incarnation of a bug, it was natural that he had less desires compared to the desires of humans. However, it did not mean that he had broken free from the desires of a living being. Logically speaking, he should have been affected by the heart restriction and would not have escaped so easily. The test of the heart restriction should treat everyone equally, but Zhang Chan was not affected. There must be something strange about this. However, if he did not enter the continent, there was no point in thinking about it. Hence, he did not dwell on this matter and ordered Zhang Chan to retreat to the side. He sat in his own pagoda and circulated his energy for half a day. Then, a drop of demon blood was formed in his body. He forced the blood out from his fingertip and into the ashes of the furnace. After a short while, it turned into a green sprout. As if it had crossed 1,000 years in an instant, it suddenly grew taller. Then, the flower bloomed and the stalk fell. Finally, an elegant young man who looked similar to him emerged. From the records of the ancestors and just now, when he passed through the formation, he knew that the stronger the person's mana was, the stronger the defenses of the heart restriction against him. Because for a normal person, the mountains and rivers were already an insurmountable moat. Naturally, there was no need to use too much strength. However, this incarnation was like a newborn baby. His thoughts were like a piece of white paper and he did not have any mana. If he went in, no matter what, he would not be suppressed by the heart restriction. However, in order to understand the situation in the continent, he had to attach his spirit to it. Moreover, it could be blocked by the heart restriction. This was a dilemma. Hence, he made a small trick. He buried his soul and consciousness deep in his heart. Once there was an accident or a drastic change in his state of mind, his consciousness would come out and replace his body. However, he could not really not have a way to defend himself. Otherwise, a giant mountain bug could ruin his plan. He thought for a while and said, "That's good. Let's use this chance to see if this path is feasible." He took out the 9 absorption demon scroll and caressed it a few times. Then he flicked his finger and it disappeared into the center of the clone's brows. Based on his original plan, he would create a clone in his own space and have it cultivate the 12 demonic images. Once it was successful, he would think of a way to get rid of the strand of consciousness and take it back for himself. Then, he would be able to obtain the body of the demonic image. Using a human to subdue a demon, and a human to become one with the demon. Since he had the chance, he might as well give it a try. Chapter 9:11. Zhang Yan looked at the clone a few more times before grabbing a handful of ashes. As the mana circulated, a Taoist robe and various scattered items were immediately refined. All of them had their own uses, especially this Taoist robe. Although it could not block supernatural powers and mana, it was not difficult to defend against normal weapons, water, and fire. However, this clone was formed from his blood essence. If it woke up and saw him, it might trigger a bit of the original consciousness in his body. To prevent the restriction from noticing, he left it at the same spot after doing all that. He waved his sleeves and controlled the pagoda to fly into the clouds. Not long after this avatar left Zhang Yan, it naturally attracted the attention of the forbidden formation. However, its heart was as clear as a mirror, and it passed through the forbidden formation in an instant. At that moment, its figure flashed, and it was pulled by an unknown force, and in the blink of an eye, it disappeared from its original spot. Zhang Yan saw everything clearly from the sky. When he saw this, he squinted his eyes. Normally, the person who passed the restriction would enter the continent. However, this clone was sent in by the restriction as if it noticed that he was different from normal people. He immediately sensed that this formation was different from the usual dead formations that followed the rules. Perhaps it was a living formation that had developed consciousness. If that was the case, there might be more changes. However, once the clone was defeated, he would know immediately. Moreover, he had the demon-subduing scroll, so he didn't have to worry. He sat down and closed his eyes to cultivate, waiting for his consciousness to be enlightened. After an unknown amount of time, the clone woke up from his muddle-headedness. He blinked and saw that he was sleeping on a big rock. He tried to stretch his arms and legs. He looked around carefully and thought that he was deep in the mountains. He muttered to himself, "I wonder where Master is?" In his memory, his name was Zhang Ming. Since he was young, he had followed a person named Daoren to learn Tao in the mountains. This time, he followed him out to sea to search for a celestial mountain. Although he successfully found the mountain, he was disturbed by the restriction outside. He was swept into this foreign land by a strong wind, and the two of them were separated. Therefore, the first thought he had was to find his master. It was to find his master. He raised his head and looked. The sky was covered in haze, as if there was a thick layer of clouds covering it. The surrounding trees were tall and it looked eerie. However, it did not look like the celestial mountain that his master mentioned. He seemed to have thought of something. His heart skipped a beat. He reached into his robes and took out a talisman. It was the light body talisman. He remembered that his master made it personally and it could help him travel 1,000 miles in a day. However, when he chanted the incantation, he realized that there was no movement. He secretly raised his chi again and realized that the inner chi that he cultivated was also gone. It was as if he had never cultivated before. He could not help but touch his head and mumbled, "There's no spiritual vigor here at all. I can only give up on this talisman." He stood up and looked around. Not long after, he found a spacious place. He took out a flint knife and knocked it a few times. Not too long afterwards, he made a fire and carefully lit the imperial edict. When it was completely burned, a cool breeze brushed his face, and his body seemed to be a bit lighter. He stretched his limbs and walked down the mountain. Although he did not know the way, he had an inspiration. He decided on a direction and walked. In less than an hour, he was out of the forest. The terrain in front of him gradually opened up and became flat. What made him even happier was that he saw a few broken stone tablets at the foot of the mountain. In front of him was a wide flat land without any weeds. He could tell that it was a road made of rammed earth. This meant that there were people here. He immediately got excited and walked in the direction of the road. As he walked, a day passed. However, the strange thing was that along the way, he did not see a single person. In the evening, he saw a village appear in front of him. He immediately became happy and quickened his pace. However, when he entered the village, he realized that there was not a single villager. It looked like the village was abandoned. He walked one round in the village. From the various traces, the people here should have left not long ago. It was at most 10 days. Moreover, they left in a hurry. He thought for a while and fetched some water from the well in front of the village to drink. Then he continued on his way. Although his body could not use mana, it was after all built by Zhang Yan's blood. His body was strong and healthy, far better than a normal body. Along the way, although he did not eat a grain of rice and did not rest, he was still full of spirit and did not feel tired at all. After another night, he went over a hill and looked ahead. His eyes could not help but brighten up. Under the morning sun, he saw a long line of people heading north. He could not see the head or the tail, but it was sparse. There were men, women, old and young. Many people were leading cows and goats, urging geese and ducks. However, all of them looked worried. Some of them were walking in a daze, crying and cursing from time to time. They looked especially panicked and miserable. He quickly went down the hill and wanted to find someone to ask about the situation. However, everyone was rushing on with their journey, and not many paid attention to him. At this time, an old man suddenly walked over. Although his complexion was also not good, his beard and hair were very neat, not the slightest bit messy. Beside him was a rather good-looking young woman carrying a baby, and there was also a 7 or 8-year-old girl standing to the side. He walked forward and bowed. "May I ask, sir, where are you going?" The old man stopped and looked at him. He asked curiously, "Little Taoist, where did you come from?" Zhang Ming could not explain clearly. He pointed behind him and said vaguely, "From there." The old man looked and said thoughtfully, "Lan Xiao Mountain. You live in the mountain. Could you be the disciple of Taoist Wang who lives on the mountain?" As soon as he said this, a skinny man suddenly came over and asked anxiously, "Taoist, are you one of those Taoists who know some celestial spells?" The old man said indifferently, "When I came here, I did say something about celestial spells. However, it was just a rumor spread by fools. I have seen that Taoist Wang before. He is just a sloppy Taoist who likes to drink. He is very ordinary." When the skinny man heard this, he immediately lost interest and walked away angrily. Zhang Ming waited for him to leave and asked again, "Sir, you are in a hurry." "This is," the old man sighed and said, "Sigh, the world is not peaceful. Demons and ghosts are everywhere. Little Taoist, you might not know this since you live in the mountain. The Xingrong city in the west was destroyed by King Guyang. I heard that 100,000 people were devoured. I had no choice but to seek refuge with my fellow villagers." Zhang Ming asked a few questions and found out that since 100 years ago, the world was in chaos. Demons and devils appeared everywhere and devoured humans. There was no longer any law in the imperial court. The generals of each province and county ruled over their own territories. It was a chaotic world. In the recent 10 years, the demon disaster became more and more severe. They would attack the prefectural cities at the slightest provocation. The world lost its population. As for the lone young great king, he was a greater demon that could flap his wings and soar into the sky, and he brought along a few hundreds and over 1,000 lesser demons. Everywhere he passed, neither man nor beast was spared. So when the commoners in the surroundings found out about this, how could they not be terrified? All of them abandoned their homes and fled. Zhang Ming listened and mumbled, "Master, is this the celestial mountain you were talking about?" The old man reminded him, "The demons and devils are here. It is not appropriate for little Taoists to hide in the mountains. You should go back and inform your master and leave this place." Zhang Ming said softly, "Little Taoist, my master is not by my side." The old man misunderstood his words and sighed, "The world is difficult. Deep in the mountains is not necessarily a paradise. My surname is Yu. If little Taoist doesn't mind, why don't you come with us? My son is working for Marquis Rong. He has some strength. With him around, there is no need to worry about evil people." Zhang Ming felt that he had nowhere to go. If he went with the crowd, he might be able to find his master. He thanked him and agreed. After walking with the crowd for a few hours, the sky gradually darkened. The crowd stopped beside a river. In twos and threes, they went to fetch water or a fire. However, no one dared to stray too far from the crowd. Zhang Ming's eyesight was good. He found a tree stump and invited Elder Yu to sit on it. He sat cross-legged on a thick piece of dead leaves and meditated according to the qi technique taught by his master. Although he could not feel any spiritual vigor and his inner qi became weak, he did not give up. Elder Yu saw that after walking for so long, there was not a speck of dust on him. He was very surprised and nodded his head. His eyes showed a look of anticipation. After a long time, he suddenly felt something was wrong. He opened his eyes and saw the little girl next to the old man holding a big bowl in front of him. She said, "Little brother, Auntie asked me to give this to you. Only after eating will you have the strength to continue on our journey." Zhang Ming saw that although his face was covered with mud, his eyes were big and lively. He looked innocent and gave people a good impression of him. He smiled and said, "Thank you." The little girl said, "My name is Jean. Where is my auntie?" She pointed and Zhang Ming looked over. When the beautiful woman saw him looking at her, she seemed to be shy and quickly lowered her head. He lowered his head to look at the bowl and saw that it was filled with something black. However, on the way to escape, it was already good enough to have something to eat. Therefore, not only did he not despise it, he even felt grateful. He covered his mouth with his sleeve and brought it to his mouth. He drank a few mouthfuls and found that it was a little astringent and bitter. He could not taste what it was, but it was warm and very warm. Jinlo waited for him to finish and took the bowl. She went to the river to wash. The weather was cold and the river was cold. Zhang Ming saw that his little hands were struggling to wash in the water. After a while, his hands turned red from the cold. He could not bear it and wanted to help. But Elder Yu stopped him and said seriously, "This is not what a young Taoist should do." Zhang Ming could only sit down. After meditating, he became more energetic. Just as he was thinking about where his master was, he suddenly heard someone playing a leaf flute. The melody was sad and melancholic. There was also someone crying, causing many people to wipe their tears. The two sides of the river were filled with a sorrowful atmosphere. Elder Yu listened for a while and sighed, "That's fourth brother Deng. I heard that he left the city early this morning to fetch his wife and son." When he passed by the city gates, he met with the fleeing crowd. Although he was fine, when he found his wife and son, they were no longer in shape. Zhang Ming felt sad when he heard this. Suddenly, there was a scream from afar. "Demon, the demon has caught up." In a split second, everyone's face was filled with fear and panic. Chapter 9:12. At the moment when the crowd was in chaos, two sharp whistles rang out, and then half a bloody corpse was thrown down from the sky. This caused an even bigger commotion. People were running in all directions, and there were cries and wails. Zhang Ming looked up. His eyesight was very good. Even in the dark of night, he could see a black shadow that looked like a huge eagle circling in the sky. However, upon closer inspection, he realized that it was a demon with a human face and an eagle beak. It had wings on its shoulders and legs on its lower body. This kind of strange-looking monster was obviously one that had not reached perfection in its transformation. It had gone astray and would not be able to achieve anything in the future. He could kill it with the lightning palm that his teacher had taught him. However, when he subconsciously raised his hand, he suddenly realized that there was no spiritual opportunity here and he could not use the lightning palm. The bird demon circled above the panicking crowd, then suddenly swooped down, grabbed a child, and flew up. A middle-aged woman let out a heart-wrenching scream. She grabbed the child's legs and refused to let him go. The bird demon flapped its wings twice but was unable to grab the child. If someone went forward to help, they might be able to save the child. However, the surrounding people were afraid of the demon. None of them dared to go forward. They all stayed far away. Zhang Ming looked around and saw a stone on the ground. He bent down to pick it up, but just as he was about to throw it, he discovered that the demon had already taken the child and was about 50-60 feet into the sky. Seeing that they were about to disappear, Zhang Ming became anxious and used all of his strength to throw the stone in that direction. Under the control of his strength, the stone flew extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it hit the bird demon's wings. It struck the bird demon's wings, and with a crack, it was instantly broken. The bird demon howled in pain, and its body swayed. It actually fell from the sky, and the child fell with it. Zhang Ming cursed. With the child's small body, falling from such a high altitude would definitely kill him. However, it was too late to save him. At this moment, a burly man suddenly leaped out and landed on the ground in a flash. He then pushed up with both hands. A muffled sound was heard. He actually managed to catch the little boy firmly. As if nothing had happened, the burly man touched him from head to toe and saw that there was no defect on his body. He put it down and stood up. He took out a small hammer from his waist and quickly walked towards the bird demon. He hit its head several times. At first, the bird demon let out a miserable scream, but after a dozen breaths, it stopped moving and stopped breathing. When the woman saw that her son was saved, she was extremely excited. She went up and hugged him tightly. Just now, the child was scared silly. As soon as he was in the woman's embrace, he immediately burst into tears. The burly man wiped the sweat from his forehead, panted a few times, and walked towards Zhang Ming. Just now, Zhang Ming didn't notice, But now he could clearly see that this person was much taller than the average person. His face was covered with a beard, and his appearance was very fierce. Elder Yu said from behind, "Little Taoist, don't be alarmed. This is my son Yuduan. Although he is a little ugly, his character is not bad." Yuduan saw that Zhang Ming knew his father and was stunned. He then grinned and gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Little Taoist, you are very capable. These demons have thick skin and flesh. Normal knives and axes can't cut them. I didn't expect you to hit them with a stone." Zhang Ming said, "I am ashamed I did not think it through. If it wasn't for Brother Yu, I wouldn't have been able to save them." Yuduan shook his head and said, "It's better than being fed to the demons." Elder Yu said, Did you come back with an empty stomach again?" Yuduan was a little embarrassed and said, "Originally, Marquis Rong gave me some food, but on the way here I saw a friend in a difficult situation, so I gave it to him." Elder Yu looked like he knew this would happen, but he didn't blame him and said, "In this chaotic world, it's not easy for everyone. If you help, then help. This is also a moral thing to do. But remember, you still have sister-in-law and nephew behind you. The family can't do without you." Yuduan said, "Father is right." Elder Yu said, "Lan Gu has prepared some porridge for you. Go and have some. I still have questions for you later." The woman ran over with the child and thanked Zhang Ming and Yuduan profusely. At the same time, a man with red eyes and the appearance of a scholar came over. He cupped his hands and said, "This Taoist priest, I would like to ask you to help me save the dead." Zhang Ming noticed that behind him, there were a few people collecting the severed corpse. The scholar's eyes dimmed and said, "That's my brother." Elder Yu sighed and said, "Little Taoist priest, if you can help, then help." Zhang Ming was a little hesitant. In his memory, his sect was pursuing the celestial way, a way to come out of the mortal world. Naturally, he wouldn't do anything to save the dead. But he couldn't bear to refuse. After thinking for a while, he said, "Then how about this little Taoist priest recite a part of my master's tranquil heart scripture?" The scholar had never heard of this scripture, but he was only here to seek comfort. He bowed and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Taoist priest." Zhang Ming sat down cross-legged and regulated his breathing. When his breathing was even, he slowly opened his mouth and recited the scripture sentence by sentence. The cadence of his voice was like a small stream, clear and melodious. It was also like the plants in spring, full of vitality in the silence. Everyone who heard it was at peace. Their hearts were filled with endless hope. Even the sorrowful atmosphere faded a little. After a long time, he finally finished reciting this part of the scripture. Elder Yu sighed, "The dead are gone, the living are like this." The scholar came up and bowed to him. He put down 2 bags of dried meat and bowed again. Then he left with his people. Yuduan stared at Zhang Ming for a while and said, "Little Taoist priest is really capable." Zhang Ming was a little embarrassed and said, "Brother Yu, you flatter me." Yuduan laughed. He went to the back to drink some porridge and came back out. Then he sat down and said, "Father, what do you want to ask me?" Elder Yu stroked his beard and said, "Can you recognize where this demon came from?" Yuduan said, "Like the soldiers under King Guyang." Elder Yu's face was filled with worry and said, "If that's the case, the demon king is about to catch up?" Yuduan said, "Father, don't worry. There are 300 personal guards from the constabulary here. It's not a problem to deal with those little demons. Every time the demon king eats a human, he will sleep for a year and a half. By then, my family would have already arrived at Delu City." He revealed a look of unwavering confidence. He emphasized, "It will definitely be all right." Elder Yu nodded silently. Yuduan turned his head and asked his niece beside him, Just now, when the demon comes, are you afraid?" Sen said, "With second uncle here, Sen is not afraid." Yuduan laughed and carried her over. He lifted her up a few times, causing the little girl to giggle. Zhang Ming was somewhat affected and a smile appeared on his face. At this moment he suddenly thought of something. He asked curiously, "Brother Yu, just now, when you jump, you seem to be able to jump further than normal people. Your arms are also very strong. Have you practiced the Qi training method? Yu Duan said, little Taoist priest is not wrong. But it's not any Qi training method. It's the mental energy elixir passed down from the constabulary Rong. After consuming it, one's strength multiplies and can last for 2 hours. But after that, one's limbs will be sore. Zhang Ming said, can you let me take a look at it? Yu Duan said straightforwardly, nothing is impossible. He took out a paper bag and passed it over. Zhang Ming took it and poured some on his palm. He sniffed it and discovered that there were a few herbs that he was familiar with. The medicinal effects were very strong, but there were some other herbs that he couldn't recognize. But he was sure that it was used to stimulate one's vital energy. If a normal person consumed it, their strength would indeed increase and it would be enough to deal with some little demons that have yet to transform. But there was a flaw. If one consumed it for a long period of time, it would hurt their foundation. He thought for a while and reminded, Brother Yu, it's best to use this kind of medicine sparingly. I'll give you a talisman. He took out a light yellow talisman. This is called the cauldron-carrying talisman. Using it will give you the strength of 10 people. Boil it before you use it and drink it with water. Yu Duan said carelessly, then I'll thank little Taoist priest. He took it and stuffed it into his pocket, as if he didn't take it to heart. Old Yu said, Duan, little Taoist priest is not someone who speaks nonsense. You must remember these words. Yu Duan said, Father, do you think I don't know that this medicine is strange? But I'm a soldier of the manor, what can I do if I don't use it? I might as well use this to kill more demons and become a proper personal guard of the manor. When the time comes, there will be a Qi training method for me. Once I've mastered this method, my bones will be strong and I'll be able to fight with those demon generals. Zhang Ming looked at the demon's corpse on the ground and said, then is this demon useful? Yu Duan shook his head and said, if not for little Taoist priest stone, how could I have killed it? This item should be yours. At this time, a few miles east of them, there were dozens of carriages parked. In the middle of them was a luxuriously decorated carriage that was covered by curtains. Marquis Rong, Yang Shuang, reclined in the carriage. He was in his early 40s and had taken good care of himself. His skin was smooth and white, and his hair was neat and black. However, there was an unconcealable haze on his face. The curtains were lifted and Crown Prince Yang Tong walked in. He reported softly, Father, the Gushan city in the south has been attacked by demons. I heard that tens of thousands of people have died. On this yellow road, only Dala city in the north and Guyang city in the east are still intact. Marquis Rong didn't even lift his eyelids. The people who died were all lowly commoners. That old fox Wang Liang must have escaped long ago? Father is wise. Marquis Rong was about to speak when he heard a commotion outside. He said unhappily, what is it? Yang Tong said, I'm going out to ask. After a while, he turned back and said, I heard that a condor demon was killed in the back. When Marquis Rong heard this, he perked up a little. Go, he said, order someone to bring the bird demon's corpse here. Skin it and boil its bones into a broth. Give it to Huan and the others to drink, so that they can cultivate their qi. Yang Tong said in surprise, and the others are still young. I'm afraid they can't bear it. Should we wait a few more years? This demon's bone and blood could be used in conjunction with some qi cultivation techniques. The 300 guards had all been cultivated in this way. However, if an ordinary person didn't know about this secret technique, or wasn't old enough or hadn't nurtured well enough, they would die from brain hemorrhaging. Marquis Rong was furious when he heard this. A few more years? All of you are good for nothings. How could this Ho have the time to wait for you? When we reach Dalu City, do you want Ho to laugh at me? Even if you have to drink it, you have to drink it. If you die, then you are not a descendant of the Yang family. Yang Tong didn't dare to raise his head after being scolded. He could only retreat in embarrassment. With a cold expression, he called a servant over and said, Go, summon 2 guards and bring me the condor demon's corpse. Chapter 9:13. Even though the bird demon was gone, Everyone felt that it wasn't safe to rest by the river, so they moved to a forest by the river to lie down. There were many people here, so they weren't afraid of any wild beasts, but they were afraid that demons would attack again. Even though the night was cold, they didn't dare to light a fire. Elder Yu gave the blanket to the pregnant woman and hugged Sen, to keep warm. Both grandfather and grandson were shivering from the cold. Zhang Ming saw this and took out a jade tablet, saying, "Uncle Yu, this can warm you up." Elder Yu's reaction was a little slow, and just as he was about to say something, he felt a warm object being stuffed into his hands. He then felt his body warming up and said, "Thank you, little Taoist." Zhang Ming said, "You're welcome, uncle." Elder Yu held it for a while and felt his body warm up. He looked at him and said, "Little Taoist, do you have any relatives in this world?" Zhang Ming shook his head, and because he was still thinking of finding his master, he asked, "Uncle Yu, in this world, are there many Taoists like me?" Elder Yu shook his head and said, "In the past there were some, but now there aren't many." Zhang Ming asked, "Why is that?" Elder Yu finally became spirited and stroked his beard, saying, "I've read in the ancient records that thousands of years ago, countries worshipped Taoism, and it was prosperous for a period of time. But I don't know what happened, but the Taoists either left or went into seclusion in the mountains and rarely came into the world again. 100 years ago, the demons were wreaking havoc, and the emperor listened to my advice and invited a few Taoists to come out of the mountains to subdue the demons, but I only found out later. These were all people who pretended to be mysterious, and if they weren't eaten by the demons, they ran away. After this incident, the number of Taoists in the world dwindled, and the Taoist temples on the mountains were gradually abandoned. In the past few years, it's hard to see any Taoists anymore." Zhang Ming said, "But when you first met me, you didn't seem to have a different opinion." Elder Yu smiled. "There's a reason for that. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I went to school. When I was 5 or 6, my father had a good friend who was a Taoist. I once saw with my own eyes how he turned paper into a person and moved a 1,000-kilogram cauldron around. I know that there really are miraculous techniques in this world, but it's a pity. It was said that after the Taoist priest passed away, not a single disciple can use this technique anymore." Zhang Ming nodded. The art of movement was just a small skill, and it was not difficult to learn. However, this technique, it should have been driven by spiritual opportunity, but now he could not feel it at all. This must be the reason why the disciple of the same sect could not learn it. As the two of them spoke softly, Elder Yu gradually felt sleepy and he lay down on the bed. But just at this moment, the sound of galloping horses could be heard from outside, heading straight for the forest by the river bank. Zhang Ming stood up to look, and saw that there were 2 people, both dressed as servants and guards, galloping along the river, circling around the bird demon, pointing with their horsewhip. "Who killed this?" After he shouted twice, Yuduan stood up and strode out. He cupped his fists and said, "It's me." The head servant took a few glances at him and frowned. "I seem to have seen you somewhere before?" Yuduan said, "Yes, I am Yuduan. Half a month ago, I stopped a frightened horse in front of Marquis Rong, and was rewarded to be a soldier in front of the residence. Now I am under Commander Li's command." When the 2 guards heard this, they instantly revealed a look of disappointment. They originally thought that this was a good job. If the other party did not have any background, they could find someone to cover up the fact that he killed the demon. But the other party was working under Marquis Rong like them, so it was not easy to do anything. Although the soldier was not a personal guard of the residence, he had connections. Once he asked for the details, he immediately understood that they could not do anything. The head servant said angrily, "Since you are one of us, I think you know the rules. Every demon that is killed must be handed over to the Marquis residence. This time the young Marquis is still in time, quickly send it over." Yuduan said to Zhang Ming, "Little Taoist, come with me." Zhang Ming wanted to reject him, but seeing that he had good intentions, he thought about it again. He wanted to find his master, but in this vast sea of people, where would he find him? If he could get help from the Marquis residence, it would be more convenient, so he nodded. The guard was surprised and asked, "Who is this?" Yuduan said, "This demon was not killed by me alone. Without this little Taoist, it would be difficult to succeed. So I have to bring him along. The head servant said, Brother Yu wants to recommend this person to Marquis Rong? Yu Duan did not answer, silently agreeing. Both of them knew that Marquis Rong usually recruited strange people, so this was not considered breaking the rules. After muttering for a while, he said, We came in a hurry and did not prepare any extra horses. Please bring the demon's corpse with you. Otherwise, if the young Marquis were to blame us, we would not be able to bear the consequences. After saying this, the two of them rode away, not giving them a chance to speak. In a short while they were far away. They did not get any benefits, so they were still a little unhappy. So they used this opportunity to embarrass Yu Duan and Zhang Ming, so that they would feel better. Yu Duan snorted and said, This place is about 7 to 8 miles away from Marquis Rong. Although it is not far, if we rush there, we would still have to drag the demon's corpse. Thinking about it, we would be in a difficult situation. Zhang Ming asked, Brother Yu, it seems that Marquis Rong cares a lot about the demon's corpse. Yu Duan said, The demon's corpse can be made into bows and arrows. If we sell it to other provinces, we can get some food and cloth. In these chaotic times, it is more useful than gold and silver. Zhang Ming grunted. This explanation made sense. The demon's bones were unusually tough and were suitable to be used to make weapons. But deep down, he felt that there were other uses. But this was an opportunity. If he wanted Marquis Rong's help, he would have to show some of his abilities. He said, Brother Yu, don't worry, I have my ways. He took out a yellow talisman. This talisman was an inferior talisman that could be thrown away easily. It was used when practicing Dao techniques. He had about 10 of these talismans with him. They were not magical weapons, but they were enough to cover a few miles. He tore the talisman and rolled half of it into a ball. He threw it into his mouth and swallowed it. Then he passed the other half to Yu Duan and said, Brother Yu, please swallow this talisman. Yu Duan was stunned, but he saw that he had already swallowed it. Without any hesitation, he also stuffed it into his mouth. However, he didn't feel that it was difficult to swallow. When it came in contact with his saliva, it melted and flowed down his throat. As soon as it entered his stomach, he felt a wave of heat rising from his back. In that instant, his body felt as if it was filled with inexhaustible strength. Zhang Ming laughed. Brother Yu, how can we make it in time? Yu Duan laughed. He walked out a few steps and pulled the demon bird onto his shoulder. He said, Little Taoist, come with me. The two of them greeted Elder Yu and walked quickly, as fast as the wind. Almost 10 miles. In less than half a minute, they had arrived. At this time, they saw a dozen carriages lined up in front of them. Before they could get close, they were stopped by a dozen soldiers on horseback. They shouted, Who are you? Yu Duan hurriedly went forward and told them the reason for their visit. That person coldly said, Wait here. He waved his hand and a soldier came forward, took the demon's corpse, and turned around to go in. After waiting for an hour, the soldier finally came out and whispered a few words into the man's ear. Then, he threw a badge to Zhang Ming and said, If you two have any family members, you can go to the back of the camp tomorrow. This is not a place for you to stay for long. Go quickly. Yu Duan was delighted. Although he did not see Marquis Yu, this result was not bad. Zhang Ming was a little disappointed, but he could accept it. If there was no chance this time, then next time would be good. The two of them did not know that the carriage camp was currently enveloped in an oppressive atmosphere. Marquis Rong sat in the carriage with a gloomy face. He said, Did you find out? The leader of the guard said, Lord Marquis, there are claw marks and bamboo tokens on the demon's body. It should be a scout under the Lone Eagle King. We must have been targeted. This subordinate deduces that in a few days, more demons will come. Yang Tong's face paled. He said with a trembling voice, What should we do? What should we do? All right, hurry up and drive the carriage. With those commoners behind, they should be able to eat their fill. They won't chase after us. The guard did not speak. Marquis Rong snorted and scolded, Shut up. He knew very well that compared to the old and the weak, the demons preferred strong and healthy people. Their group was more likely to be targeted. He could only think of a way to deal with it. He calmed himself down and asked, "Lord Zhu, the bird demons are coming. How confident are you that you can stop them?" Leader Zhu said, "If there are a few dozen, this subordinate can still manage. But if there are 100 or so, it will be difficult to deal with." Yang Tong said in disbelief, "Good food, good drink, and you 300 people. In the end, you still can't deal with 100 demons?" Leader Zhu said calmly, "Young Marquis, those demon birds can fly. If we encounter them, we can only try to force them away. It will be difficult to hurt them." Yang Tong said angrily, "I heard that someone could kill one today. How come you can't do it?" Leader Zhu was not angry. He looked at Marquis Rong. This subordinate just now heard of this. This person may have a secret technique. Why don't Marquis invite him over to ask? Marquis Rong said decisively, "Pass on my orders. Invite that Taoist here." Leader Zhu bowed. "This subordinate will go personally." He lifted the curtain and left. Zhang Ming and Yu Duan had just returned when they were caught up by the people of the manor. They were then respectfully invited to Marquis Rong's carriage. After entering the carriage, Marquis Rong looked at him and cupped his hands. "How should I address this Taoist?" Zhang Ming bowed. "This Taoist's surname is Zhang." Marquis Rong nodded. "I have invited Taoist here today because there is a matter that concerns the tens of thousands of people here." Zhang Ming's expression turned solemn. "What is it?" Marquis Rong immediately ordered Leader Zhu to tell him about the demon's attack. In the end, he asked, "Does Taoist have a solution?" Zhang Ming thought for a while. This Taoist might be able to help. Hearing that he had a solution, Marquis Rong was excited. But he did not show it on his face. "What is it?" Zhang Ming said, "This Taoist just now, the soldiers in the camp have strong bows in their hands. This Taoist has a talisman that can transform divine power. Drinking talisman water can increase one's strength and will. When the time comes, we can shoot with the big bow." He paused. "If Marquis Rong doesn't believe me, this Taoist can demonstrate." Floating astronomy. Chapter 9:14. If Marquis Rong had any other ideas, he would not lower himself. He was here to seek advice from Zhang Ming, a Taoist of unknown origins. Although he still had some doubts about this, seeing how confident Zhang Ming was, he was a decisive person. He waved his hand and said in a low voice, "There's no need to demonstrate. Don't doubt the person you use, don't use the person you doubt. I heard that Taoist priest killed the demon in order to save a life. I trust you." Zhang Ming raised his hand and bowed. "Thank you for your trust, Marquis. But to be safe, I need to prepare some things." Marquis Rong said, "Everything in the carriage camp, if you need it, you can take it." He turned his head and instructed his subordinates, "Give this Taoist an empty carriage for him to rest in." The steward beside him said awkwardly, "All the carriages are occupied, there's nothing left." Marquis Rong said impatiently, "There are only 7 or 8 carriages, the rest are just bottles and jars. We're here to avoid danger, what's the point of keeping them? I'll throw them all away." The steward did not dare to speak again. He bowed and went to make arrangements. Zhang Ming bowed and said, "I'll go make talismans now." Marquis Rong said, "Then I'll have to trouble you." Yang Tong waited until Zhang Ming left before saying, "Father, do you really believe him? If it was 100 years ago, the Taoist sect might still have some power, but how can there be any wise people now?" Marquis Rong snorted. "What can I do if I don't believe him? Do you have a way to ensure the safety of the sect?" Yang Tong was speechless. After Zhang Ming left, Marquis Zhu followed him out. He said, "Marquis Rong asked me to protect the Taoist, you can tell me what you need." Zhang Ming agreed and listed out all the items he needed. Zhu Manor leader could tell with a glance that the items were not difficult to find. In less than a moment, everything was prepared. Then he set up a big pot in the middle of the camp and started cooking. Zhang Yan stood by the side and ordered his men to throw in the medicinal herbs from time to time. After cooking it for a night, he took out a talisman and threw it in. Another hour passed. He said, That's settled. Marquis Zhu, everyone put it in a water bag and drink it before you meet the enemy. It had miraculous effects. It's just that you can't use it more than once a day. Lord Zhu did not believe it. Could such an inconspicuous little talisman help them fend off the demons? Zhang Ming saw the doubt on his face and took a few steps back. He said calmly, Zhu Manor can give it a try. The head of the Zhu family cupped his fists and apologized. He picked up a wooden dipper and drank it in one gulp. In an instant he felt his entire body heat up and his limbs become strong. It was very different from the medicine that stimulated blood and qi. He clenched his fists and took a big bow from his subordinate. With a light pull, a creaking sound was heard as the bow was pulled to a full moon. He was shocked. This bow was made from the muscles and bones of demons. Usually, it was only used to train his strength. Being able to draw half of the bow was already good enough. He was immediately convinced. He cupped his fists and said, Taoist master, I have underestimated you before. Please don't blame me. Naturally, Zhang Ming did not mind. He returned the courtesy and said, The Zhu family appreciates your words. The leader of the Zhu residence had something to rely on, and immediately arranged for his subordinates to come over and fill the water. By the time everything was ready, it was already dawn. The carriages did not dare to stay any longer and continued their journey. After traveling for a short while, the sky gradually brightened. At this moment, a bodyguard with good eyesight pointed and said, Chief Zhu, look over there. The leader of the Zhu residence looked over and saw a few black dots in the sky flying towards him. His heart sank, knowing that the demons had really come. He shouted to his subordinates, Drink the talisman water. Following his order, the 300 bodyguards immediately took out their water pouches and drank. Then, they shouted a few times in unison and raised their bows to wait. Yu Duan and the other strong soldiers split into groups of 3 to 5. They stood beside the bodyguards and pointed their spears at the sky to provide cover for the demons. The bird demons looked like they were still far away, but after a while, they were already above their heads. However, the defense here was tight and they could not find a chance to attack. They could only circle in the sky. Zhang Ming saw that these bird demons were very organized and couldn't help but look at them a few more times. With this look, he discovered something. He raised his hand and pointed at one of the bird demons. He said, Leader of the Zhu residence, look at that demon. It seems to be their leader. The head of the Zhu residence looked in the direction he was pointing at. Indeed, it was different from the other bird demons. Its feathers were brighter and beautiful. He immediately drew his bow and took a slight aim. Then, he loosened his finger and felt his hand shake. There was a muffled hum next to his ears. The bird demon had already fallen. The demons lost their leader and were in chaos. The head of the Zhu residence saw this and was overjoyed. He hurriedly ordered his bodyguards to shoot at the sky. One by one, the bird demons fell from the sky. Before they could even land, more than half of them were dead or injured. The remaining ones screamed in fear and ran back. After all of them had retreated, the head of the Zhu residence was in disbelief. It had only been 100 breaths' time, but he had defeated hundreds of bird demons. Normally, he wouldn't even dare to think about it. Only when he heard the cheers around him did he come back to his senses. However, he did not let the joy get to his head. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and shouted, Do not let your guard down. Continue to be on guard in case the demons attack again. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. However, with the results just now, they were filled with confidence and were no longer as fearful as before. In the next half a month, with Zhang Ming's help, although the bird demons attacked many times, they were all defeated by the bodyguards of the Ho residence who drank the seal water. There were very few casualties among them. Because of this, there were more and more people following the carriage. Rong Ho also valued Zhang Ming more and gave him many good things. However, the latter did not need these things and rejected them all. He only mentioned that he wanted to find his master. Rong Ho naturally agreed. Yu Duan was also promoted to a soldier and was given the qi cultivation technique. Together with a bowl of medicinal soup, his strength increased greatly in a few days. He could not be compared to before. He was very proud and came to find Zhang Ming to show off his skills. However, he saw that Zhang Ming did not seem to be in a good mood. He couldn't help but ask, "Little Taoist, did I do something wrong?" Zhang Ming shook his head and said, "It has nothing to do with Big Brother you. I was just thinking, this technique works so quickly. If everyone can use it, they wouldn't be forced into such a state by the demons." Yu Duan said, "Little Taoist must be joking. This is the foundation of the survival of the people. If we give it to them, who would listen to him?" Zhang Ming said, "But I heard from old man Yu that the demons are rampaging and see the people as food. At this time, do we still need to worry so much?" Yu Duan laughed and said, "Until the last moment, who would give their favorite things to others? Even if they die, they would still hold on to it." Zhang Ming lowered his head and thought. He sighed and said, "That's true." Yu Duan looked at him and said, "Little Taoist, don't think too much. The city is the golden capital of the north. There are tens of thousands of soldiers stationed in the city. They seem to be the bodyguards of the whole residence. When you get there, you can settle down. Little Taoist, aren't you looking for your master? Maybe you can meet him there?" Zhang Ming nodded and smiled. "Then I will thank Big Brother for your kind words." For more than 10 days, the carriages were calm and peaceful. There were no attacks from the demons. It seemed that they would reach the city in another 4 to 5 days. Everyone revealed a relaxed smile. At this time, Old Man Yu's wife, Lan Gu, gave birth to a son. The Yu family has another descendant. He was overjoyed. But Zhang Ming felt his heart was heavy, as if something bad is going to happen. He looked at the sky and hoped that he was just thinking too much. Another 3 days passed. During this time, Zhang Ming was meditating in the carriage when he suddenly heard the sound of flapping wings coming closer and closer. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. He lifted the curtain and jumped out of the carriage. However, the scene that entered his eyes caused his breathing to stagnate. The sky was filled with densely packed black silhouettes. It looked like there were at least 1,000 bird demons flying over. The night sentries in the carriage camp also reacted quickly. They hurriedly blew their whistles and all the personal guards got up and picked up their weapons. Just like before, the elite soldiers gathered together and pointed their spears at the sky. But just as they got into formation, suddenly there was a sharp whistle in the sky. Zhang Ming's head buzzed and he almost lost his balance. He looked at the guards and saw that half of them had fallen. At this moment, the flock of birds in the sky parted, and a demon general came out. It looked like he had already transformed into a human form, but he still had a pair of wings on his back. He revealed a sinister smile, and with a shake of his body, thousands of feathers flew out. Each of them was as fast as arrows, and the soldiers below were caught unprepared. Immediately, dozens of people were nailed to the ground, and those who didn't die let out miserable howls. Yu Duan's eyes widened as he collapsed to the ground. His chest was riddled with bloody holes and he was spitting out mouthfuls of blood. He turned his neck with great difficulty as if he wanted to look elsewhere. Zhang Ming saw this and exclaimed, "Big Brother Yu." Yu Duan looked at him and opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. But he couldn't. He twitched a few more times and stopped moving. Zhang Ming's heart twisted, and a burst of anger ignited in his chest. He bent down, grabbed the stone, and threw it into the air. At the same time, he felt something warm in his chest. It was as if there was a surge of qi flowing into his body. The rock that he threw actually made a sharp sound. There was a loud bang and the demon general let out a pitiful cry. After a while, the demon birds retreated like the tide. But there were a few that didn't go far and were left circling in the air. With this opportunity, Zhu Fu's leader ordered the carriages to retreat to the side of the forest. He took a look and found that in this short period of contact, more than half of the bodyguards were dead or injured. Zhang Ming was a little depressed. He thought that he could rely on the talisman water to get through this. But he didn't expect that the demons, which numbered in the thousands, could easily destroy the situation he was trying to maintain. At this time, someone hurried over and said, "Priest Zhang, Marquis Rong wants you to discuss some matters." Zhang Ming nodded and followed him to the carriage. He sent a message and was immediately called in. At this moment, Marquis Rong's eyes were bloodshot. Seeing him arrive, he said in a hoarse voice, "Taoist priest, I heard that you injured that demon and forced it to retreat. However, Zhu Manor's leader said that it hasn't gone far and will return soon. Does Taoist priest have a way to repel it?" Zhang Ming was silent for a while, then sighed, "Just now, I was lucky to injure the demon leader. But if it comes back again, I have no way." Marquis Rong's heart sank. "Is there really no way?" Zhang Ming only shook his head. Yang Tong suddenly jumped up and pointed at Zhang Ming. "It's all because of you, it's all because of you. If you hadn't defeated that bird demon and lured us bodyguards to kill it, why would so many demons be attracted here?" Marquis Rong stepped forward and kicked Yang Tong, saying, "Disgraceful thing." His face became incomparably ferocious. Gritting his teeth, he said, "It won't be that easy to kill me. Zhu Fu's leader, pass on my orders. Gather firewood and oil everywhere. If that demon comes back, set it on fire for me. Set it on fire." Zhang Ming's heart trembled. This was a dense forest. Once it was set on fire, it would be able to temporarily repel the demons, but they wouldn't be able to escape. He wanted to speak, but seeing Marquis Rong's crazed expression, he knew that persuasion would be useless. He bowed and retreated. Marquis Rong didn't care about him anymore. He didn't even look at him. After Zhang Ming left, he walked to the front of his father-in-law's carriage. He must have heard of Yu Duan's death by now. He couldn't bear to see him grieve, but after some hesitation he still lifted the curtain and entered. But when he entered, he was startled. He saw his father-in-law sitting calmly in the carriage, as if waiting for him to come. He took a deep breath and said, "Uncle Yu, we can't stay here for long. I have a way to hide and bring your family out." Elder Yu smiled. "Little Taoist, I know you have the ability to get out." Zhang Ming hurriedly said, "Now is not the time to talk." Elder Yu raised his hand to stop him from speaking. He sighed. "How many more days can I live? Even if I save them, it would be a waste of food, and it would be a burden to you. Why don't you take Lan Yang and leave?" When the little girl beside him heard that she was going to be sent away, she cried and chased after Elder Yu's sleeve, saying, "Grandpa, don't go, don't leave Grandpa." Elder Yu's eyes were filled with love. He caressed his granddaughter and solemnly cupped his hands, saying, "Taoist Zhang, I'm counting on you." Chapter 9:15. Zhang Ming wanted to persuade him again, but Elder Yu only shook his head and said nothing. Zhang Ming looked at his calm expression and knew that he had made up his mind and couldn't be forced. He sighed and picked up Shang, who was still crying and throwing a tantrum, and said, "Uncle Yu, I will go pick up Lady Yu and her son later. I will definitely bring them out safely. Uncle, take care." Elder Yu nodded his head in relief and saluted him, "Thank you for your trouble." Zhang Ming was afraid that Sanner's voice would attract attention, so he gently caressed her neck and the little girl fell into a deep sleep. When he got out of the carriage, he looked left and right and saw the soldiers walking back and forth, all of them looking tense. Many of them were already preparing to pile firewood and pour oil. It was obvious that Marquis Rong was waiting for the demons to attack and was about to set fire to the forest. He knew he had to hurry, so he quickly walked to the side of the female carriage. There were originally more than 30 guards here, but just now that the situation was critical, they were all transferred to the outside to defend against the demons. They didn't know if they were dead or alive. Only a few people who looked like stewards were nervously guarding with wooden sticks in their hands. They recognized Zhang Ming and saw that he was carrying a child, so they didn't stop him. Zhang Ming saw that there were 3 carriages here, but he didn't know which one belonged to Lady Yu, so he asked, "Lady Yu, where are you?" A weak voice came from the carriage on the right. "Is this Priest Zhang?" Zhang Ming walked a few steps to the front of the carriage. Because it wasn't convenient for him to enter, he said softly from outside, "Lady Yu, the demons are strong and the situation is critical. Elder Yu asked me to fetch you and your son and quickly leave this place." Madame Yu's voice carried a hint of weakness as she said, "How can I leave in my current state? You don't have to worry about me. Just send my son to the city and hope that he can live a peaceful life." Towards the end, her voice was choked and she started to sob quietly. Zhang Ming tried to persuade her, "Lady Yu, how can your son be born without a mother? It's fine for me to bring one more person, don't hesitate, we can't stay here any longer." Lady Yu heard that his words didn't sound like he was comforting her and her spirits rose slightly. Her voice trembled, "Is priest serious?" After all, she could live. No one was willing to die for real, not to mention that she still had a newborn son that she couldn't bear to part with. Zhang Ming's voice was steady as he said, "I really have a way. Lady Yu, please believe me." Yu Furen was silent for a while before replying, "It's just that it's inconvenient for me to move around. I can only trouble you, Taoist priest." Zhang Ming saw that he agreed. He heaved a sigh of relief. He said, "Then forgive me for being rude." After waiting for a while, he lifted the curtain and entered. He saw his wife lying on the couch. She had a headscarf wrapped around her forehead and a thick blanket wrapped around her body. There was originally a maid serving her by her side, but she had long since left. The baby was sleeping soundly on the side of her face. Excusing himself, he took out a red brush and quickly sketched the talisman on the inner wall of the carriage. As he moved, a cloud of smoke gradually enveloped the carriage. At this time, he suddenly heard a sharp bird cry from outside, as well as the sound of flapping wings. He knew that the bird demon was attacking again, so he hurriedly increased his speed. After he finished drawing, he felt slightly tired. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and went outside. He took out a water bag and fed it to the 2 horses. After a while, it seemed like someone shouted a few times. From several directions, thick smoke billowed out. The camp was in chaos. There were people running and crying. Zhang Ming ignored them and took out a talisman from his pocket. He lit it up and pointed at it. With a bang, the talisman turned into a ball of spiritual fire and floated in front of the horses. When the 2 horses saw the fire, it was as if they were attracted by something. They neighed and kicked their hooves, chasing after the fire. Wherever Zhang Ming's hand pointed, the fire would flutter in that direction. Zhang Ming drove the carriage out of the forest. Lady Yu's voice came from inside the carriage. She asked anxiously, "Priest, where is father-in-law? Why isn't he coming with us?" Zhang Ming said quietly, "Uncle Yu is determined to die. He doesn't want to go with us." There was silence in the carriage. Zhang Ming sighed. If he had his master's abilities, he wouldn't have to do this. He would be able to protect the people here. But when he thought of this, he was puzzled. His master should have reached this mountain, but why didn't he come to find him? Or could it be that his master was powerless against this demon? He was flustered. He felt that this was the truth, but deep in his heart, he didn't want to believe this answer. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, his vision brightened. He was outside the forest. He looked up into the sky and immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. The sky was densely packed with bird demons. There were many times more of them than just now. Just now, there were more than 10 demon generals that he had injured. Luckily, the talisman was there to cover him. The carriage and horses hid their tracks and sounds. They ignored him and ran away smoothly. Even so, after escaping danger, his back was full of cold sweat. If he were to travel according to the usual route, following the forest and the river, then heading north on the official road, it would only take him 3 to 4 days to reach Joy City. But he didn't dare to take the main road. Fortunately, he had the help of talismans. The carriage passed through the forest as if it was flat ground. After 4 to 5 days, he arrived at an open area. He gradually saw people here, but they were also refugees. Seeing that he had a carriage and a horse, they came to him. In a day, more than 100 people gathered. After asking around, Yang Kai learned that these people were fleeing from ancient Yang City in the east. 2 days later, he saw a boundary stone with the words "Look County" written on it. A middle-aged scholar was sitting next to the stone. His clothes were tattered and he looked dejected. Zhang Ming got down from the carriage and walked forward. He bowed and asked, "Mister, may I know how to get to Dalu City?" He repeated the question twice before the man finally responded. He raised his eyes and smiled bitterly. "Joy City? What Dalu City? 5 days ago, the city was destroyed by the demons. His words immediately caused an uproar. The surrounding people all revealed looks of disbelief. Someone's face turned red as he ran to the front, pointed at him and said, "You, how can you spread rumors and create trouble here?" The middle-aged scholar sneered and said, "I'm spreading rumors and causing trouble? I was originally a scribe under Marquis Li's tutelage. 5 days ago, a great demon invaded. Marquis Li led over 10,000 elite soldiers out of the city to defend against it. Who would have thought that with a single breath, the city would collapse and Marquis Li would die on the spot? Over 10,000 elite soldiers were routed and in the end, only half of them managed to escape." Hearing his words, the man was stunned. Then he took a few steps back. He shouted, "I don't believe it, I don't believe it. 10,000 elite soldiers couldn't defeat a demon. You must be talking nonsense. You must be talking nonsense." The scholar looked like he wanted to say something. However, he suddenly gave up. His face was full of sorrow as he let out a long sigh. He sighed and said, "Demons can control spells. No matter how strong the personal guards are, they are still mortals. How can they fight against them?" The man was stunned for a while. Then he seemed to lose his strength and sat on the ground. Cries could be heard from the crowd. They came all the way to the city to seek refuge. They thought they could find a safe place to stay. But they didn't expect it to be a dream. The middle-aged scholar couldn't bear to see them like this. He said, "I will point you to a place. Go to the northeast. There is a high hill called Heaven Descending Slope. It was the former capital of the previous dynasty. All the civilians and soldiers went there. You can also go there." Zhang Ming said, "The wilderness is full of demons. It is not peaceful. Why don't official Lin go with us?" The middle-aged scholar seemed to be struggling for a while. Then he nodded. The descending heaven slope was not far from where they were. Under the guidance of the middle-aged scholar, they walked for 4 hours and saw a tall mound. Below it were sections of the city wall that had collapsed a long time ago. Now, the bottom of the mound was filled with refugees. Because this old city was located on a plain, Zhang Ming's vision was unobstructed. With a glance, he estimated that there were at least tens of thousands of people gathered here. At this moment, there were a few people dressed in official robes outside the city, leading soldiers to maintain order and distributing porridge. There were no more corpses on the road. It was obvious that someone had been assigned to collect them. This meant that there were still officials maintaining order in this area. The situation was better than what he had expected. The middle-aged scholar saw it too. He smiled bitterly and said, "Luckily, the demons don't eat rice, so the grain in the warehouse was not lost. Otherwise, with so many people here, they would have starved to death before the demons came." At this time, a group of soldiers passed by. They were all wearing heavy armor. They had short blades on their waists and bows and arrows on their backs. They wielded large axes and long spears. Wherever they passed, dust was stirred up. There were only a few hundred of them, but they had the momentum of 1,000 soldiers. The middle-aged scholar pointed and said, "These are the elite soldiers of Marquis Lu. I wonder if there are more than 1,000 of them?" Zhang Ming looked for a while and said, "From what I have seen, the guards of Marquis Rong's estate are much stronger." The middle-aged scholar said, "Joy City is the capital of a county. Of course, the guards of Marquis Rong can't compare to them." "Wait, Marquis Rong?" His expression changed as he asked, "Didn't you come from ancient Sun City?" Zhang Ming said, "They are just passers-by. I came from the west. When I heard that Xingrong City was destroyed, I came to Joy City." The middle-aged scholar asked anxiously, "When did this happen?" Zhang Ming thought for a while and said, "I don't know the exact time. It should be about half a month ago." The middle-aged scholar's forehead suddenly beaded with sweat. He took a branch and drew 4 city outlines in 4 different directions, and then drew out the roads along the way. He murmured, "It should have been 15 days ago. On the 16th day, the Gu Shan city was conquered, and on the 17th day, the ancient Sun City was conquered. These 3 cities attacked almost at the same time." His hand suddenly stopped and he threw the branch away. He looked up to the sky and let out a long sigh. "This demon is really cunning. It is like herding a flock of sheep. He wants the people to gather in Joy City so that they can drown them in one fell swoop. His face was full of tears as he looked at the people rolling down the slope. He sighed and said, "The common people have done no wrong." Facing such a great disaster, just watch, in a few days, the demons will eat everyone in this world. Eat everyone in the world. Zhang Ming was shocked and said, "Officer Lin, what do you mean?" The middle-aged scholar smiled bitterly and said, "Don't you know? Out of the 8 counties in this world, there are still traces of people in my county. As for the other 7 counties, they have been ravaged by demons for more than 10 years. Perhaps, the area below Euphoria City is the place where all the people have perished." Chapter 9:16. Zhang Ming was incomparably shocked. He had never thought that in this so-called celestial mountain, the people of the world had already reached such a state of destitution. According to Scribe Lin, the world's population had already been reduced to 9 out of 10. The remaining people were struggling at death's door, barely managing to hold on to a corner of the land. Even a small storm could drown them. At this time, he unconsciously thought, could it be that Master was really not here? If not, why did he not come out to help? Could it be that he was only focused on pursuing the path of celestial cultivation, so he turned a blind eye to this? With his ability, if he did not try to be brave and hid deep in the mountains, it would not be difficult for him to avoid this calamity. However, he asked himself in his heart, if he did not do anything and did nothing to help those who were dying, he could not. For a moment, his emotions were in a mess. Scribe Lin saw that his expression was not good and said, "Little Taoist, don't think too much. This world is like this, how can it be changed by human strength? But before you die, you must think of a way to eat your fill." At this point, he could not help but touch his shriveled belly. Even though there was no shortage of grain here, it was only porridge and thin soup, not enough to satisfy his hunger. Zhang Ming came back to his senses. Even though his body was strong, these days he had been hiding from place to place and had not eaten much. Now that he heard him mention it, he also felt a little hungry. He said, "Official Lin, I still have some food in my carriage. Please wait a moment, I will go get it." Scribe Lin said happily, "Then I will benefit from Taoist this time." Zhang Ming went to the carriage and took some dried meat wrapped in oil paper. Then, the two of them leaned against a low wall and ate. Not long after they sat down, they saw Lady Yu get out of the carriage with a bamboo basket in her hand. Zhang Ming stood up and said, "Lady Yu, it is freezing outside and your body is weak. Why did you come out?" Lady Yu walked in front of the two of them. She lifted the cloth covering the bamboo basket and revealed a small jar of wine. She said, "Just now when Taoist came, you forgot. I have some wine here. You too can take it and drink it. It will also help to ward off the cold." Scribe Lin cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, lady. There is meat without wine, it is not good." Zhang Mingqi said, "Why is there wine beside madam?" Lady Yu said sadly, "Uncle loves to drink, but Gong Gong was afraid that he would cause trouble when he drinks, so he ordered me to keep it elsewhere. Before this, I had been hiding it in the carriage. We were in a hurry on the way here, so I did not throw it away." Zhang Ming thought of Yu Duan's death and felt a little sad. He consoled her, "The dead are gone, Lady Yu. Please take care of yourself." Lady Yu said, "Thank you, Daozhong, for your concern. I understand. Both of you, please enjoy yourselves here. I will return to the carriage first." Scribe Lin brought the wine jar over and opened the seal. He took a whiff and said in surprise, "It's actually the finest Zen Suxiang. Who is this lady?" Zhang Ming sighed and recounted what had happened on the road. When Scribe Lin heard that the entire family was now left with only an orphan and a widow, he couldn't help but sigh. He picked up the wine jar and drank a few mouthfuls in one go. Then he lifted his sleeve to wipe the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, "I don't know if this demon will be able to eat this rotten meat of mine." Zhang Ming looked at him and said, "Official Lin, you don't seem to be afraid?" Scribe Lin chuckled and said, "The past cannot be admonished, the future can still be chased. Death awaits either side, so why worry? In this life, I have always acted according to the will of others. I have lived my entire life as a yes man and had no choice. Now that I am here, I can finally be the master of my own house. When Zhang Ming heard this, his heart was moved. Yes, master often said to follow his heart. Where master is, what he does, that is his business. Why should I bother? Everything I do, I only need to follow my own heart. Once he thought it through, it was as if some shackles had been removed from his heart. He stood up and asked, "Official Lin, I wonder who is in charge of the city now. Can you bring me to meet him?" Scribe Lin put down the wine jar and asked cautiously, "What does Dao Zhang want to do?" Zhang Ming said, "I am skilled in talisman arts, which can increase the power of the army. I also have a way to block that spell." When Scribe Lin heard this, he was even more excited than he was. He jumped up and grabbed him, saying, "Really?" Not waiting for Zhang Ming to reply, he laughed again and said, "At this time, who cares if it is true or false? If Dao Zhang is willing to help, then it is for the best. Come, I will lead you there." The two returned to the carriage and, under Scribe Lin's guidance, went into the city. After traveling for half an hour, they arrived in front of the ruins of a high platform. There were hundreds of tents around it, and outside, there were soldiers holding swords at their waists. They looked at the people on the road with vigilance. The carriage stopped in the distance, and Scribe Lin had just jumped down from the carriage when one of the guards recognized him. He shouted, "It's Official Lin, Official Lin has returned." His voice was filled with joy. Zhang Ming looked at Scribe Lin. This Official Lin's identity might not be as simple as he had said. Not long after, he heard the sound of footsteps from inside, and then he saw a group of people hurrying out. The leader was a young man wearing a brocade robe and a tall hat. When he saw Scribe Lin, he hurriedly came up and bowed. His expression was slightly excited as he said, "Teacher, you have returned. I have been looking for you for a long time." Scribe Lin sighed and said, "Young Marquis, as a teacher, I am ashamed to face you." The young man said in a low voice, "Father's matter was not teacher's fault. Teacher does not need to blame yourself." Scribe Lin was about to speak again when an attendant at the side said, "Official Lin, now it is time to call you Marquis." He couldn't help but be startled, and then he nodded his head. With Marquis Li's death, this eldest son naturally inherited the title. He solemnly bowed and said, I am Lin Mujie." The young man held him up and said, "Teacher, there is no need to be like this. Although Li Shugong inherited the title, he is still teacher's student. Now I need teacher to teach me how to deal with this." Scribe Lin smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said, "Marquis, there is nothing I can do in this situation. But this Taoist beside me is an expert in talisman techniques. He originally cultivated in the deep mountains. A few days ago, he brought a mother and son and broke out of the encirclement of thousands of demons. He is truly capable." Only then did everyone notice Zhang Ming beside him. Seeing that he was only 14 or 15 years old, they were somewhat skeptical. But Marquis Le did not doubt Scribe Lin's words at all. He solemnly bowed to Zhang Ming and said, "For the Taoist to be able to come out of the mountains at this time of the world's destruction, it is enough to show that you are a person who cares for the common people. Li Shugong will first thank you on behalf of the people of the county." Zhang Ming returned the bow and said, "Marquis is too kind. When the nest is overturned, there are no eggs that remain intact. I do not wish to become food for the demons." Marquis Lu nodded and said with a smile, "That is natural. I have just inherited the title and naturally do not wish to live in the belly of the demons. I am even more reluctant to part with my beautiful wives and concubines." As soon as he said this, everyone unwittingly smiled. The solemn atmosphere around them eased a little. Marquis Lu said, "What does the Taoist need to cast the spell? I will send someone to prepare it." Zhang Ming did not stand on ceremony and listed the items he needed. Someone beside him noted it down and then handed it to him for inspection. After checking that there were no mistakes, he said, "I need 3 days to cast the spell. Do not come and disturb me during this time. Otherwise, it is very likely that all our previous efforts will be wasted." 3 days? Marla slowly nodded and said solemnly, "Within 3 days, no one will disturb the Taoist." Marquis Li's subordinates worked very quickly. In more than 2 hours, they had gathered all the items Zhang Ming needed. He then asked for a large tent and ordered people to move the items inside. Then he chased everyone out. At this moment, in the large tent, there were hundreds of neatly cut bamboo slips. Zhang Ming clearly remembered that Euphoria City was breached due to the demonic power. Before that, Le County had relied on the strength of the elite soldiers to hold on for more than 10 years. This meant that as long as he could think of a way to resist the demonic power, with the strength of Euphoria City alone, it was not impossible to defend this last remaining piece of land. He composed himself and sat in front of a table. He took out a stack of talisman papers from his bosom and lit a fire to burn them. Then he collected the ash and sprinkled it on the inkstone on the table in front of him. Then he took out a dagger and cut his finger. He squeezed his blood into it and mixed it together. Then he dipped a brush in it and took out a bamboo slip. Finally, he wrote on it. This was using his own blood as a guide to trigger the power of the talisman. Once it was activated, the effect would be doubled. However, this method was extremely damaging to one's vitality. In his memory, his master had repeatedly warned him to be extremely cautious when using this method. Otherwise, if he was not careful, his life would be in danger. However, other than this method, he could not think of any other way to restrain the demonic power. If he could save tens of thousands of people, he was willing to lose his life. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Zhang Ming worked day and night and finally drew the talisman on the hundreds of bamboo slips. At this moment, although his face was pale and his eyes were lifeless, his heart was gratified. With this scroll, he could defend against the demonic power. He pulled himself together and went out of the tent. However, the sun was blinding his eyes and he felt a little pain. He quickly lowered his head and passed the bamboo slip to a person waiting by the tent door. He said in a hoarse voice, "Send this to the Marquis. When the soldiers go to battle, they only need to recite it." However, the person did not reach out to receive it. He sighed and said, "It is a pity that Taoist has put in so much effort. However, in the current situation, even if you can defend against the power of the demonic power, you will not be able to turn the situation around." Zhang Ming was shocked when he heard this. At this moment, he saw the face of the person beside him. "Official Lin?" He asked anxiously, "What is going on?" Scholar Lin sighed and said, "Taoist, go outside and take a look. You will know." Zhang Ming pushed him away and stumbled out of the tent. He looked out and saw that outside the mountain city, there was a sea of demonic power in the sky and on the ground. For a moment, there was an uncountable number of them. The bamboo slips in his hand fell to the ground. Just like the demonic power, even without using any power, it was enough to drown these tens of thousands of people. Scholar Lin came to his side and smiled bitterly. "Man proposes but God disposes. What can we do?" Zhang Ming looked outside and thought to himself, "That's right, the heavens are like this and no man can change it. Could it be that teacher knew this would happen and thus didn't help? Could it be that I really did something wrong?" He suddenly turned around and walked down the stage. Scholar Lin said, "Taoist, where are you going?" Zhang Ming did not even turn his head, as if he did not hear. Scholar Lin shook his head and looked down. He said to himself, "Isn't it the same everywhere?" On the heaven-following slope, tens of thousands of people were surrounded. Looking at the demonic power surging in from all directions, everyone showed a look of fear. Zhang Ming walked in the crowd, confused. At this moment, he heard a young child's voice. "Father, mother, I'm scared." He turned around and saw a middle-aged couple holding him tightly in their arms. "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Father and mother are here. Don't be afraid, Lenin." He looked around again and saw that the people around him were either trembling, screaming, numb and motionless, or kneeling and begging for mercy. At this moment, a scholar said sorrowfully, "The sky is high and wide. Why can't we be accepted? Why can't we be accepted?" His voice was heart-wrenching, each word weeping with blood. Yes, the sky is high and wide. Why can't we be accepted? Zhang Ming muttered it twice, and then his footsteps paused. He said to the sky, "This world can't go on like this." As soon as he said this, something in his mind was triggered. With a loud bang, an inexplicable force suddenly burst forth. When he raised his head again, a divine light suddenly bloomed in his eyes. At this moment, Zhang Yan's true consciousness had awakened from his doppelganger. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.